The Super Nintendo is my favorite console. Big surprise, right? So many good games from a variety of different developers. But since there were so many good games, some aren't acknowledged as much as others. So for this video, in no particular order, I will highlight some lesser mentioned games for you to try out in the future. These are 10 underrated Super Nintendo games. Now, you may see the name Tetris and think, how is this underrated? Tetris is pretty much the most popular video game puzzle series ever, except for maybe Minesweeper. Well, start a game and you quickly realize Tetris Attack isn't your typical Tetris game. Tetris Attack was released in 1994 and is an English translation / port of an original Japanese puzzle game named Panel de Pon, except with Yoshi Island branding all over it. As opposed to the 4-block shape clearing nature of the original Tetris, Tetris Attack instead focuses on 2 block shapes, except each block is marked with a different color that must be matched up with the same color in order to be cleared from the board. Blocks will steadily move upward, and it is up to the player to move the cursor and arrange the blocks before they reach the top of the screen. Once at least 4 of each block are lined up, the blocks will disappear and will cause blocks over it to fall as well. For such a simple concept, the gameplay is addicting, and Tetris Attack has multiple game modes that utilize the puzzle format in different ways, including a story mode, versus mode, and even a puzzle mode. The addition of the Yoshi's Island aesthetic only adds to the charm of the game, especially as the soundtrack is concerned. So maybe just ignore the game being called Tetris and enjoy what it has to offer. Underrated Disney show spawns underrated Capcom video game? How poetic. But it's true, the adventures of Goofy and his son Max are entertaining on both platforms. Goof Troop was released in 1993 by Capcom and is a top-down action-adventure game, similar in look to Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. Instead of a sword though, Goofy and Max must use their environment to take out their enemies, solve puzzles, and make their way to the boss of each level in order to save PJ and Pete. Personally, I just let them go and go console Peg, but never mind, forget it. Single player is fun by itself, if not a little short, but the real enjoyable aspect of the game is the multiplayer, in which 2 people can play co-op throughout the entire game. Both people have their own inventory slot, which means cooperation is necessary to progress. It's another 90s Capcom license-based game that is better than it has any right to be, and a good time if you and a friend need a hidden gem to play. Now, silly title aside, if you haven't tried this game, I highly recommend you give it a shot, especially if you have a friend ready to spend hours along with you on the experience. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was released in 1993 by Lucasfilm and Konami for both the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and is 48 levels of madness. You control typical 90s stereotypical kid version 1 and 2 as they go through each level shooting zombies, ghouls, and other wild creatures while trying to save all of their neighbors in each level before leaving through a spawning door. At your disposal are all the weapons you can gather in these random locations, including a water gun, weed whacker, cross, and fucking bazooka, and from there, you just try not to die. You might think this game is a simple kiddie running gun, but it is deceptively hard. You are on the clock to save your neighbors, as if the zombies reach them first, they get murked. Now at first this might not seem so bad, as hunting after multiple neighbors can get tiring, but they don't respawn, meaning even if you go to the next level, the amount of neighbors remain the same, which can be real bad if you end up near the end with one neighbor, cause as soon as they get got, it's game over. Single player is fun enough, but 2 players can turn a chaotic experience even more hectic, and is worth the headache. Ever see yourself as a god? Okay, calm down there. Curtail those awful thoughts. Have you ever seen yourself as a god and instead of sending just blessings to your followers, you come down yourself just to beat the crap out of demons? That's the basic premise of ActRaiser. ActRaiser was released in 1990 by Quintet and Enix. You control literal God as he inhabits a statue and saves the world himself. You make your way across multiple levels, fighting various demons with a sword and the various magical attacks you gain on the way, till you make your way to some abomination as a boss. This is only half the game, however, which is why ActRaiser is a quirky, underrated game for the Super Nintendo. In between the action levels, you control your growing populace and a top-down city simulator, where you help your people expand their towns by clearing land, watering crops, using your angel minion to shoot demons with arrows, you know, the usual stuff. This combination of two different gameplay styles are a unique blend that, oddly enough, isn't on enough people's lists of great Super Nintendo games. The ActRaiser series in general is odd, with the sequel cutting out the city building entirely, and a remake coming 21 years later with the addition of a anime city building design and Sega Saturn action stage graphics, all mixed into one. You ever just see a box art for a game on a shelf and immediately think, who the hell is buying this? Well, as Phalanx has proven, you shouldn't always judge a book by its cover, cause ooh boy, who was super excited to play Equinox based on this? Yep, that sure is a cover alright, but I'm here to say if you haven't checked this game out based on this, you really missed out. Equinox was released in 1993 by Software Creations. It is a sequel to the game Solstice that was released on the NES in 1990 and retains the action-adventure isometric puzzle platforming gameplay. You control the character Glendale in search of his father, who was the main character in Solstice. You explore room after room in the generated level dungeons, solving puzzles, killing enemies, and gathering keys and all the spoils you can. The graphics and music are a considerable upgrade on the SNES hardware from Solstice, and the ramped up challenge through all 8 dungeons with increasing amount of rooms will give you all the interest that you could ever ask for. Check this one out. Hey, remember this series? Capcom sure doesn't. The last time we got a Breath of Fire game was a mobile scam in the mid-2010s, and before that was Dragon Quarter in 2005. The 4th game is probably the peak of the series, but the best on the Super Nintendo is Breath of Fire 2. Breath of Fire 2 was released in 1994 and is a turn-based RPG that doesn't stand out due to the twin towers of Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. But people who are seeking a fun alternative should definitely look this way. While the first Breath of Fire was also great, it suffered from a clunky interface and poor translation between regions. While Breath of Fire 2 also has its own translation problems, with the names of moves and locations being butchered, it is a considerable upgrade from the first game. The combat is smooth, the moves are varied, and each character has an interesting story arc throughout the timeline, starting with 2 kids stealing from a church and ends with all the characters fighting God. You know, besides Gene. Gene sucks. Let's rev up our engines and go commit a war crime.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Horizontal shooters were all too popular in the NES and Super Nintendo era, with Life Force and Gradius being among the most popular. But have you considered adding anime to the mix? UN Squadron was released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo and loads of gaming computers, and was developed as an arcade port by Capcom. You pick between 3 different pilots based off a Japanese manga series called Area 88, who each have their own different skill sets and planes, and fly through a variety of levels gunning down enemies and trying to keep your life bar up to keep your bird in the sky. For being one of the best horizontal shooters on the Super Nintendo, UN Squadron doesn't nearly get the props as much as I think it should. The gameplay is tight, the customization with the planes and special weapons you can purchase keep every level interesting, and the general aesthetic, sounds, and visuals of the game carry it to be one of the very best on the console. The Indiana Jones trilogy, is one of the most iconic 80s action films, and along with Star Wars, really highlighted how amazing main hero actor Harrison Ford is. While a lot of games based on the series aren't really worth thinking about longer than a couple hours, Indiana Jones' Greatest Adventures is one that you should definitely keep note of if you haven't already. Indiana Jones' Greatest Adventures was released in 1994 by Factor 5, JVC, and LucasArts. If you are familiar with the Star Wars games on Super Nintendo, this game is similar in scope of being faithful to the movies and being a really fun platforming game. So why did I choose to include this instead of those games? Easy. Those games are separated by movie, and this is all in one cartridge. I might be joking, maybe just a little bit. Seriously though, this game adapts the plot of all 3 movies into really imaginative levels. Whether you control Indy jumping through caverns whipping enemies, flying a plane, going down in a raft, or swinging across pits avoiding your doom. This game is a little more on the easy side than the Star Wars games, since there are 28 levels you need to get across, but it doesn't diminish that this game is worth picking up if you have the chance. The Super Nintendo was a silent haven for beat-em-up games. Arcades had load of iconic beat-em-ups like The Simpsons, TMNT, Final Fight, and others. Ports to home consoles in the 16-bit era weren't always perfect, but most on the Super Nintendo retained most of their arcade charm. Sonic Blast Man, in contrast, retains very little from his arcade version, as the arcade version required players to put on gloves and literally falcon punch a punching bag to defeat enemies. The port to the Super Nintendo rightfully dropped that element and made it a beat-em-up, which was fun, but immediately outclassed by its eventual sequel. Sonic Blast Man 2 was released in 1994 by Taito and improves on the first beat-em-up in almost every way. First and foremost, you have multiple characters to choose from this time, as opposed to the first game, and also opposed from the first game, multiplayer is included. All of the levels are varied with different artwork, and the fighting is tight and enjoyable. Yeah, it can get a little mind-numbingly spammy at times, but when else are you gonna be able to punch the floor in a game and make everything explode?
I'm fighting for freedom.
So awesome. Since Nintendo is based in Japan, some games don't make the transition overseas to us in the Americas. In particular, there are some series that are infinitely more popular over there that don't correlate here and vice versa. For example, the Goemon franchise is super popular in Japan, and at the start, the games weren't even released in the West. That changed when Ganbare Goemon Yukihime Yukushutsu Umaki was released over here as The Legend of the Mystical Ninja. The Legend of the Mystical Ninja was released in 1991 and was made by Konami. You control Goemon or Ibisumaru if you're playing 2-player mode as they make their way through towns, buying equipment, earning money, talking to villagers, playing mini games, and generally preparing themselves for the second part of the level, which is a typical platforming beat-em-up with a boss at the end. The game has a lighthearted charm to it, with the characters being entertaining and the plot going out of left field on more than one occasion. The sprite work is honestly impressive, and the soundtrack complements the Japanese tones nicely, all adding up to a superb gaming experience. The Legend of the Mystical Ninja did not sell well in the West, which is a travesty as this game more than lives up to any possible expectations consumers may have had. Have any other games that I may have missed? Leave them in the comments below. Thank you, and have a good one. The NES was an important milestone in video game history, due in no part practically saving the industry after the video game crash of 1983. This system began the long-reigning juggernaut franchises such as Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and other frequent highlights. However, what about the other ones? You know, the games that, while good or notable, got completely overshadowed by the Big Boys Club. Well, in this video, I'll list some off for you to check out. In no particular order, here are 10 underrated NES games you should play. Okay, let me get this out the way. Up first, we have Batman the Movie Game. I know I keep coming back to spit-shine this game every chance I get, but why not? It's an excellent platforming game with nice looking graphics and a bang-heavy soundtrack, and really puts you in the mood of being the Caped Crusader. Running and jumping your way throughout the levels, using both your fist and the various bat weapons to take down the baddies is super satisfying, and the cutscenes look amazing for a simple NES movie-based game. If you have to check out at least one game from my list, this is the first suggestion. Based on the Warner property of the same name, Tiny Toon Adventures looks awfully familiar in its interface, doesn't it? Well, if you're thinking of Super Mario Bros. 3, you aren't alone. A smooth platformer with some really fun mechanics and character switching, Tiny Toon Adventures is a very underrated NES game that you should check out if you ever have the chance. Don't let the cute exterior fool you though, this game can get difficult. And on top of that, you might get strangled by Elmira. A puzzle game featuring the Goblin brother, cousin, clone of Mario? Okay. Wario's Woods is the tale of the dastardly troublemaker making trouble, in the peaceful woods, and you control a toad to stop him. This puzzle game was overshadowed by the usual suspects like Tetris and Dr. Mario, but give this one a chance. You use bombs to clear lines of enemies, with Toad literally stepping in the line of fire to do so. With multiple enemies and random occurrences to keep you on your toes, Wario's Woods is definitely worth the brain space. An underrated shmup that doesn't get on the same platform as Life Force, Gun Knack is a robust and fun game with many different power-ups and bosses, including this bunny for some reason. The different upgrades that you can achieve actually keep you interested in getting through the game and seeing what else it can provide. And the challenge will keep you busy for a long while. DuckTales 1 is a pretty popular NES game, made in the heyday of Capcom Disney platformers. But did you know they made a sequel? DuckTales 2 retains the choose-your-own-level structure of the original game, but expands the amount of treasure you can find while refining the pogo stick controls. This game was released super late in the NES lifespan, so it was largely overlooked for the shiny frame of the Super Nintendo. But that only makes playing this hidden gem later in life so much more satisfying. A Simpsons game on this list? And a puzzle one at that? Well, yes. Krusty's Funhouse is a weird but still fun experience. Essentially Simpsons Lemmings, you control Krusty the Clown trying to get rid of mice terrorizing his show, mostly by moving blocks and other parts to direct them to these elaborate murder traps, while also not getting hurt by the various animals wandering around the play level. Actually difficult at times with the solutions. This game may not be something you would choose at first glance, but I highly recommend you give it a shot. Yay, it's a party! Monster Party is a side-scroller where you control a kid named Mark, who's armed with a baseball bat and not afraid to use it. You go from side to side in each level, entering doors to fight mini-bosses that allow you to traverse to the next level when you defeat them all. The enemies drop these magic pills that turn you into a badass demon that can fly and shoot projectiles. With a long runtime and, let's just say, interesting level and boss design, if you want a simple platformer, Monster Party won't let you down. It might scare you though. Another visit on the Disney NES carousel, this time with Bucky O'Hare, which in my opinion is vastly underrated from its contemporaries in both game and the show it was based on. Where is our Bucky O'Hare reboot, huh? But anyway, if you enjoy the other Disney platformers, this one will also be in your wheelhouse, with the titular Bucky O'Hare off to rescue his fellow crew members on different planets, who are also playable once rescued. The run and gun gameplay is generally compared to the Mega Man series, and the graphics and gameplay variety ensure that you won't have a bad time or get bored playing this one. Okay, I swear it is the last Disney platformer, but I couldn't leave off Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. You select either Chip or Dale and make your way through a variety of stages, picking up boxes, objects, and other things to throw at enemies. One of the big selling points of this game is the co-op multiplayer, in which a good buddy can help you along as the other chipmunk in stopping the evil Fat Cat. With great graphics and a wholly underrated soundtrack, you should grab a friend and try this out whenever you can. I didn't say anything about that being the last Capcom game, however. Capcom in this age was at a high, and it's debatable if they ever exceeded it in the future. Gunsmoke is a vertical shooter in which you control a vagrant cowboy gunning down outlaws from level to level with different weapons and your horse to support you on the way to taking down the big bad of each level. It's a really addictive gameplay cycle that can keep people hooked for a long time. That being said, the music will start to grate on you, so don't be afraid to use that mute button. Uh-oh, it's Capcom again. And wait, Final Fight had a game on the NES? Well, yes, actually, and it's an unironically really good. Instead of trying to mimic the sprites at arcade or even the Super Nintendo version of the game, Mighty Final Fight takes a sort of chibi-ish design, which honestly makes it feel like a brand new game. The beat-em-up gameplay is enjoyable. It honestly pushes the NES hardware to make up for the translation. This game came out late in the NES lifecycle, so it's no surprise that it's been mostly overlooked. Are there any other games that I should take a look at? Leave them in the comments, and maybe I'll do a sequel list in the future. Thank you so much, and be sure to like the video and subscribe. See you later! So heads up, I didn't grow up with the Genesis. We were a Nintendo household through and through. Fight me, Sega fanboys. But getting older and finally getting around to owning my own stuff, I found that Genesis games really hold up like Super Nintendo stuff does. From iconic platformers, ports, and other highlights, the Genesis more than holds its own. Before Sega inevitably went down the downslope through a mix of new competition and 32X madness. But before the glory days were over, the Genesis had more than a few games that didn't get a proper spotlight on them. And today, I'm gonna highlight a few of them. In no particular order, here are 10 underrated Genesis games you should play. Comix Zone was released for the Sega Genesis in 1995 by Sega, with ports coming to Windows and the Game Boy Advance. An action platformer, you control artist and musician Sketch Turner, who through various hijinks has Mortis, the main villain of the comic book that he is making, come to the real world and throw Sketch into the comic book world. With the help of his character General Lissa-chan and his pet rat Roadkill, Sketch must work his way through his own comic, beating up various drawn baddies from Mortis in an attempt to find his way back home. Comix Zone adapts a comic stylized art style, with the various scenarios being comic strips, and advancement through the level means to literally hop from panel to panel. Sketch can fight the various enemies hand to hand, but can also pick up various items to help him on his way, including Roadkill, who acts as a friendly companion who can also electrocute enemies for some reason. Comix Zone is a really gorgeous looking game, and the combat is tight enough to not feel cheap or out of place in terms of the universe. While the game is relatively short, the difficulty holds up to give you an enjoyable experience. There are also multiple paths in this game, including the ending, so you have more of an excuse to experience this gem again and again. Now, running guns were a dime a dozen on Sega Genesis, with a couple that may or may not appear on this list later. But first, we have to take a look at the absolute beauty that is Alien Soldier. Alien Soldier was released on the Mega Drive in 1995 by Treasure. I specify Mega Drive as in North America. This game was only available through the Sega Channel, an online cable service. But oh well, this game is awesome. You control Epsilon Eagle, an android on a mission to avenge his earlier defeat and save the planet by blowing stuff up with one weapon at a time. Alien Soldier really buckled down on the run and gun concept, with multiple types of weapons being chosen at the beginning of a level from a group and can be freely switched through during combat, including rapid fire, homing, and even a laser. Unlike most running guns, and especially its direct influence Gunstar Heroes, which Treasure also made, the focus is more on boss fights, which function oddly enough like one-on-one fighters. The sections in between are more filling than anything with substance, but that's fine, as finding the best weapons for the job against one enemy is just as involved as the other methods. This game is fast-paced, leading to some hectic combat at times, but also pretty tight, and most important of all, fun. If you can find a PAL Mega Drive, this should be one of the first pickups you make. Aw yeah, a Disney game! And with the two headliners already in the title, The World of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck was released for the Genesis in 1992 by Sega. This game is the sequel to the Herald 1990 platformer Castle of Illusions starring Mickey Mouse. World of Illusion not only holds up compared to that game, but at some points goes beyond it. You control either Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, or both in a newly introduced two-player mode, as they are sucked into a magical box from an evil magician and are sent to a strange, magical world. Both characters can use magic capes to defeat enemies and platform to grab collectibles to find their way to the end of each level. While most of the levels are standard platforming, they can also include diving underwater, flying on magic carpet, and other wild situations. The characters chosen actually affect the routes taken, as some levels only Mickey can traverse and vice versa, though in two-player mode, players can help each other out with ropes instead. This game is gorgeous, even beyond the time, with the sprite work actually holding up to this day. While the gameplay can be easy, the game definitely doesn't lack when it comes to having a good time. And hey, at the very least, you get to play as Donald Duck. Mega Turrican was released on the Genesis in 1994 by Factor 5 after many delays in finding a publisher, with an earlier release on the Amiga in 1993. Technically the third game in the underrated Turrican series, you control Bryn Maguire, who after years of peace is rudely interrupted by the return of the Machine, along with its annoying dark forces. To protect humanity, Bryn has to again slip on the Turrican suit and let the guns fire to save the world. A running gun, Mega Turrican makes it clear straight out that you should always have your guns blazing, as enemies will come out of everywhere. Levels are large and spread out, leading to exploration being necessary to find a way to the next area, yes, but also to potentially find secrets, which can include gear and extra lives. Bryn has at his disposal 3 different firing modes, differentiated by the colored jewel pickups that represent them. Also at his disposal is the ability to use a grappling hook to help with platforming, a limited screen clearing bomb, and the ability to roll into a ball and lay bombs a la Metroid style. The gameplay is fun, with the multiple ways of defending yourself leading to different ways to play, and the bosses, while not very memorable, provide an extra challenge in between the chaos. If you have never experienced a Turrican game before, I highly recommend you start with this one. Dynamite Headdy was released on the Genesis in 1994 by Treasure. A side-scrolling platformer, you control Headdy, a puppet with a detachable head. Complicated, I know. One day, his world is taken over by evil puppet king Dark Demon, and he, along with some other helpful friends, must step in and stop him. Headdy can throw his head as an attack, but also use it to propel himself in various directions and move objects using his friends, and also swap out his heads for various attacks, which could include Vacuum Head, Fireball Head, or even Sleepy Head. Hey, that's me! Dynamite Headdy boasts an impressive graphical palette, with each sprite being super detailed and the platforming taking full advantage of the 17 different heads the players can stumble upon. The variety of the gameplay really lends itself propelling up Dynamite Headdy as a headliner platformer, much on the same level as Sonic, but it's a shame it's not talked about nearly as much as Sonic when discussing good platforming games on the Genesis. Decap Attack was released on the Genesis in 1991 by Vic Tokai and Sega. You control Chuck D. Head, as he works to defeat Demon Max Decap, with the help of his creator, Dr. Frank N. Stein, and his assistant Igor. Chuck must go through each section with a jump and a weird face-punching attack that he's used to take out enemies. Along the way, he can find a skull which functions as a weapon and a defensive tool, health upgrades to increase his maximum life, and various potions that can cause different effects such as invulnerability, power up to Chuck's attacks, and even eliminating everyone on screen. Each world is split into 3 levels, each with a boss at the end, but sometimes you'll be told you can't leave till you find a specific item. This game is pretty simple, but still holds up even among the later platformers that include many bells and whistles. It's a competent, spooky stylized platformer that you can give to anyone and they'll understand pretty quickly. This is an experience you should bring out every Halloween to celebrate the ghoulish holiday. X-Men 2: The Clone Wars was released on the Genesis in 1995 by Head Games. Based upon the Clone Wars arc that was running at the time in the comics, you control the X-Men in their battle against the Phalanx, a cybernetic species who aim to corrupt the entire Earth. The Phalanx's first plot is to take over Sentinel, but then moves to assimilate the entire world. The X-Men and subsequently Magneto must band together to stop this one level at a time. By one level at a time, I mean, of course, as soon as you switch on the power to your Genesis. You start with a random character and immediately begin the game, no title screen or anything. Once you reach the end, then you'll see the opening credits and the title screen will show up mad late. This weirdness does not take away what a delightful action platforming game this is. The X-Men represented in this game, Beast, Wolverine, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Psylocke, Gambit, and later Magneto, all play differently based upon their mutant powers, and even have passive abilities that further that, such as Wolverine healing automatically. The game is a blast to play from start to finish, with the difficulty getting through the levels not getting in the way of having fun playing them. The story is actually interesting, and being able to play a comic book plot in real time must have been enthralling the kids in the 90s. This game should be counted amongst the best in on console, though in some profiles, it's lost to history. A business airline simulator? Seriously? Yes, I'm being dead serious. Aerobiz Supersonic is a really underrated game on the Genesis, and one that you should play if you have the slightest interest in simulator games. Aerobiz Supersonic was released in 1994 on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo as a sequel to the previously released Aerobiz. As opposed to the super action-heavy games that I talked about already on this list, this is indeed an airline business simulator. You pick an era of aviation, your starting point in the world, and bam, you're in competition with 3 other airlines to take over the world. Now, while this may sound like busy work, and it is in no way boring. You must make decisions for your airline, whether that be where the lines go, how much it'll cost, what plane to use, what promotion to use, etc. It can get super detailed when getting down the stretch, and that's what makes it fun to play. I don't know squat about the airline industry besides not taking big cologne bottles through TSA, but I know if Air Europe decides to move in on my territory in North America, we're retaliating with half-off flights, new vacation spots, and new routes to England. Stuff like this is why Aerobiz Supersonic is one of the most underrated games on the console, and one that I know most people haven't tried out, but really should. Mutant League Hockey was released on the Genesis in 1994 by Electronic Arts. Like Mutant League Football, violence and wackiness is transported into the sport of hockey in its less talked about sequel. You can pick any of the made up teams that were in the previous game, though instead of the 5 different species, you only have 3 in this game, which include robots, skeletons, and trolls. At its base game, it's just hockey, but just as violent as its predecessor, which still works well as that sport is already violent. All over the ice are hazards such as obstacles and holes in the playing field that can and will claim players. Fights are still here and are made more prioritized by making it a minigame that will cause the loser to suffer more afterwards. Fans can throw weapons and obstacles on the ice, refs can be bribed, it's all just lunacy, and perfect for people who just wants to pick up and play the game and enjoy the absolute chaos. You can play single games or start and continue a season, but either way, this game deserves to be on the same level as the football version, including getting a revival. Get on that now, EA! Air Buster was released on the Genesis in 1991 by Coneco and was an arcade port that also went to the TurboGrafx-16, where it was renamed Aero Buster. You control the blaster fighter, Starship, to destroy the Machine Empire before it destroys the Earth. A horizontal scrolling shoot-'em-up, the blaster fighter must be controlled to avoid enemy blasts and destroying the machines coming towards him from the right side of the screen. The fighter can be upgraded by gathering pickups dropped by destroyed enemies, though this doesn't extend to defense as the fighter is destroyed after getting hit once. This game is relatively simple, though really fun to play. While it may be easier than genre standouts like Gradius or even Hellfire, which was also on the Genesis, that doesn't disqualify it from being a visually pleasing, hidden gem of a title that should be experienced for any fan of the genre. Have any other games that should be on this list? Leave them in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please be sure to subscribe to see more. Have a good one. Bye. This Great Brit has changed billions of lives. I mean playing with it, by the way, though I don't doubt you could probably beat someone to death with it if you really wanted to. I mean, it survived the bombing, for Christ's sakes. The Game Boy was the perfect portable console, even with its many limitations. In fact, I think the limitations actually made the games have to innovate more, and the following games in this video definitely don't get enough recognition for what they brought to us. Quick note, if you're looking for any Game Boy Color games on this list, they won't be here. They have their own list coming up. In no particular order, here are 10 underrated Game Boy games you should play. Now, TMNT beat-em-ups are not a new thing. Between the arcade, NES, Super Nintendo, and Genesis, people have had their fill of choice. The Game Boy even had their own set of games to hold over to mobile gamers. The first 2 are very basic, but for my money, I recommend you try TMNT 3. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Radical Rescue was released on the Game Boy in 1993 by Konami. You control Michelangelo as he gets back home to find all of his brothers missing, kidnapped by the Foot Clan. You must explore the map, defeat enemies, avoid traps, and go about finding pizza, keys, and other items in order to individually free your brothers to take on Shredder. This game is not linear like all the others. In fact, it could be classified as a Metroidvania. You can take on any boss you find to get a key to free the other turtles, who then become usable in-game. Each turtle is differentiated by their special abilities, like Michelangelo being able to float in the air using his nunchucks, and Raph being able to hide in a shell to protect from damage. This game is really pretty for a Game Boy game. The sprites are rather distinct, and exploring is actually really fun. The bosses can be challenging, but overall, it's worth it to check this rather obscure game out. we have our first non-North American game on the list, because Trip World didn't come out in the North American regions. And it's a shame too, because this game is worth playing for any owners of a portable console. Trip World was released on the Game Boy in 1992, and it was developed by Sunsoft. You control Yakapoo, the bunny creature, whose main goal is to find the Flower of Peace, which has been stolen and has caused the citizens of the world to experience the pedestrian's riot cheat from GTA. Trip World is a platformer where you can jump from platform to platform, avoiding pits and spikes using your stubby little kick to attack enemies. So what makes this game stand out? Simple. Yakapoo is able to transform between 3 base forms. There's his normal form, with the previously mentioned jumping and kicking. There's the flying form, which lets Yakapoo fly briefly. And then there's the fish form, which while useless on land, allows Yakapoo to swim fast and shoot bubbles in water. These forms allow the gameplay to remain fluid, with the transformations required to progress across specific obstacles. That's not all, however, as the pickups you can get will allow you to change into even more forms. There's Tiny Form, which makes Yakapoo small, Tail Form, which gives a stronger physical attack, Ball Form, which prevents most damage and turns into a ball, and many more to find. Now, if you're like me, you've probably had Kirby in the back of your mind playing this, but I would argue that Trip World differentiates itself enough to step out of Kirby's shadow and show everyone that it is worth being experienced. Okay, before you immediately go to the comments and say, a Mario game, underrated, L plus ratio plus you were never on, Dre, let me explain. I don't think Super Mario Land 2 is too underrated in terms of the Game Boy. Everyone who's played it knows it's great, but I think it's underrated in terms of the Mario franchise as a whole. Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins was released on the Game Boy in 1992 and made by, well, Nintendo. This sequel to the 1989 Super Mario Land is superior in every way, and I feel no guilt in saying that. Being released after Super Mario World, this game directly takes sprites from the game, and for a Game Boy game, it looks great. Even though it's only black and white, or green on the Super Game Boy. Everything is distinct with new additions on existing sprites. Everything else that was created specifically for this game is also great. Backgrounds and new enemies? Great. The music? Amazing. Wario? Yes, this is the first appearance of Wario in the series, and of course, he's the main bastard. This game usually gets left out of the best of Mario games list, and I really disagree with that. Give this game its due before the terrifying first sprite Wario comes after you. James Bond 007 was released on Game Boy in 1998? Huh? I'm surprised this wasn't for the Game Boy Color. Anyway, this game was made by Sapphire and published by Nintendo. Now, what would you expect the gameplay for a 007 game to be? The console games were either FPS or action shooters, so does this game match? Well, no actually. This game is actually a Legend of Zelda style adventure game. And no, I'm not kidding. You control James Bond across a couple of different missions, walking around a scrolling screen across a map layout, talking to various bystanders, finding items, and solving puzzles around fetch quests while laying the smackdown on various enemies. While this sounds like a mess and a half, it's actually a real tight bundle of fun. The game can actually suck you in when you're questing across the map to find new tools to help grant you access to new areas. And while the combat is pretty basic, every new item helps out against the harder gun-wielding enemies. And with the James Bond property being represented, franchise players like M, Q, and Oddjob all show up, bringing with them an air of legitimacy to the Savvy Spy series. This game may be a little oddity that you really have to play to believe. Gargoyle's Quest was released on Game Boy in 1990 by Capcom. This game is a spin-off of the Ghosts and Goblins franchise and is actually the first game in its own series that continued on the NES as Gargoyle's Quest in 1992 and the Super Nintendo as Demon's Quest in 1994. You play as Firebrand, the annoying fucker who killed many Arthurs in his day. Firebrand must venture across the Ghoul realm, gathering items and upgrades while fighting against the Destroyers so he can become the Protector, Red Blaze, at least in theory. The most accurate way I can describe this game is Zelda 2. You have two gameplay styles, one overhead like an RPG map screen, and the other a side-scrolling platformer, just like Zelda 2. With Firebrand though, you have access to different abilities than Link, such as hovering, wall climbing, and different projectiles that can all be upgraded, leading to a different gameplay feel from Zelda 2. In the overhead gameplay mode, Firebrand can wander around towns talking to the various locals for clues and items, and can walk around the world map to the individual level sections. You are also susceptible to random encounters in Overworld 2, another thing just like Zelda 2. Honestly, Zelda 2 is overhated by the community at large because it's the outlier in the Zelda gameplay cycle, so any excuse to play another game just like that is enough for me. But that doesn't diminish what Gargoyle's Quest does on its own, especially on the go. The plot structure is simple enough, but engaging. The different upgrades you can get leave you curious about what's next, and the music and sprites are all excellent. This is another Game Boy spin-off that can fully stand on its own 2 feet. Kid Dracula was released for the Game Boy in 1993 by Konami. It is a sequel/remake of the early released Famicom title, Akumajo Special, Boku Dracula-kun, and is considered a part of the Konami Castlevania franchise. You control Kid Dracula as he, along with his servant Death, ventures out to stop his traitorous minions who have joined his returning nemesis, Galamoth. Kid Dracula, though, has forgotten most of his spells, so it requires you, the player, to defeat each boss in each level in order to recover each spell. If you are a fan of simple platformers, this is the game for you, especially on the go. Kid Dracula starts out with only a few abilities, including turning into a bat to fly over obstacles, but for each boss you defeat, you gain a few new interesting features, such as homing beams, attack bats, a bomb blast that helps you traverse through levels, and an umbrella, which is just perfect to deflect attacks coming towards you. As dark and classical the Castlevania series is as a whole, Kid Dracula is an interesting departure with its kid-friendly aesthetic, but is worth checking out if you are even the tiniest bit interested in the gameplay and the lore. Solomon's Club, also known as Solomon's Key, was released in 1986 for the Game Boy, NES, PC Engine, and the Commodore 64. This version was developed by Graphic Research. A puzzle platformer, you control Dana and your goal is to go into every level to get Solomon's Key and get to the exit without getting hurt by enemies or letting the time run out. Dana will die instantly if touched, so the key is to avoid any hazards that may be in your way. You can fight back, however, by creating and destroying blocks at will and making enemies fall and use power-ups that can help you defeat the enemies. The level structure means you can choose what level you want to do at any point, which includes 5 worlds with 10 levels each, which is perfect for portable card games. In fact, Solomon's Club reminds me of apps nowadays with its pick up and play nature, you know, without the microtransactions, gambling, and general predatory business behavior. You can continue on with a password given after every cleared stage, so you can continue on, slowly working your way across the game, finding secrets until eventually you beat it and feel on top of the world, and then you start over again because dang, this game is addictive. Mole Mania was released for the Game Boy in 1997 and developed by Pax Softnica. A little known fact about this game is that it was produced by Shigeru Miyamoto. Yes, the Mario Maker himself. And with that fact known, is it any surprise Mole Mania, while not well known, is a really good game? You play as Muddy Mole, a family man who has had his family stolen from him by Jinbei, a grumpy farmer, and the ruler of the land. So I'm guessing it's Alabama. You must solve screen after screen, moving objects and throwing and pulling black balls to make your way to the next area. The main feature distinguishing Mole Mania is the option to dig underground, which is used extensively in some puzzles. Sometimes you may want to avoid an enemy this way, sometimes you just need to get to the other side of a particularly ornery object blocking your progress. The ingenuity between the use of these few mechanics makes solving puzzles particularly delightful. Going from level to level, you can really start to see the developers' minds working as they crafted a fun experience for anyone who gave it a chance. This game never received a proper sequel, which is a shame. I feel like a Mole Mania app would actually be pretty popular, hopefully with less loot boxes for new hats though. Uh-oh, we got another non-North American release game on the list. Man, the Japanese and Europeans were really petty to us pure non-violent and holy Americans. Hammer and Harry, Ghost Building Company was released on Game Boy in 1992, and it was made by Irem and Atlas. This game is actually the third game in the Carpenter Gen series, with the previous two coming out on arcade and Famicom. You control Harry, who's just a simple Japanese carpenter trying to save the love of his life, his hometown. Oh, and I guess this lady right here. This game is a beat 'em up, with Harry wielding his trademark hammer against a variety of ghosts and ghouls coming to take him down. Harry can swing in all four directions and attack in the air with his hammer. His downswing is actually a ground pound move, which will stun enemies briefly. This game is pretty simple. Walk around a crazy environment, defeat all the enemies, move on. It's monotonous, but for the Game Boy, which is built around quick playing, it will entertain you dearly. The game isn't too hard to find online, so if you ever want a quick beat 'em up to keep you busy on a car ride, go ahead and look this way. Now I want to remind everyone that the Game Boy is built around portable gaming, yes? Games don't have to be super complicated or complex to keep your bratty children occupied on the ride to the euthanasia center. Even simple puzzle games in their own way can stand out, which is what this version of the franchise does on Game Boy. Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle was released in 1989 and came out on the Famicom, NES, and Game Boy. The history of this franchise is honestly madness, with a bunch of different licensed characters taking the mantle of headliner for this puzzle series, but oh well. Let's just focus on this one. You control Bugs Bunny as you walk around individual puzzle levels with the goal to gather all the carrots. The levels are usually concise rooms full of stairs, elevators, or pipes that require you to maneuver around them to get all the pickups. You get all the carrots and you go to the next level with extra life. But the other Looney Tunes characters don't like you getting all the carrots for some reason, and if they touch you, Bugs has a seizure. You can defend yourself by avoiding them completely on the structures, or by pushing blocks or other objects into them or onto them from a height, and you can even pick up a boxing glove to knock the crap out of them. This is basically the whole game in a nutshell, with the levels becoming more and more complex. This simple concept might not seem like it's anything special, but you'd be surprised how much you can get sucked into the gameplay and continue playing even after you reach your destination. There's a reason the Crazy Castle franchise survived more years than most people realize. Have any other Game Boy games that don't receive the perfect amount of love? Leave them in the comments. Bye everyone, till next time! Who knew adding some color would cause an explosion of good games? The original Game Boy was already a juggernaut. Adding color to the games made some legendary experiences that hold up to this day. And just like the Game Boy, I'm gonna list 10 games you should dig out your mother's basement, or I guess your room. Like before, I'm limiting this to strictly Game Boy Color games, since we already listed the original Game Boy titles. In no particular order, here are 10 underrated Game Boy Color games you should play. Survival Kids was released for the Game Boy Color in 1999 by Konami. A survival Legend of Zelda style RPG, where exploration for food and resources on the daily is the name of the game. You control either a boy or a girl who is shipwrecked on a lost island after your possibly qualified father did an oopsie. From the start, you are told to explore the island for resources and hopefully a way to make it off the island. You can gather items off the ground and scavenge food for survival. But with only raw resources, will you get far? Well, you can combine materials to make better tools, such as a bow and arrow, whip, fishing rod, and such. Day to day, you are told to continuously explore, keep your hunger, thirst, and exhaustion meter satisfied by eating non-poisonous food and water, and getting rest in your empty discovered cabin every night before you pass out outside. Survival Kids is oddly super immersive for a late 90s Game Boy Color game, with you actually motivated to keep your character alive, along with the general curiosity for exploration you'll have day to day. It's similar to modern games like Minecraft, where you scavenge for resources to survive and prosper, and along with great visuals and OST, this game is worthy of the time you'll no doubt put into it. Yay! Survival Kids actually turned into a franchise, as Survival Kids 2 was released in 2000 for the Game Boy Color, and its legacy continues with the Lost in Blue franchise on the Nintendo DS and Wii. So you can have all your fill of miserable kids you want, you absolute monster. Perfect Dark was released for the Game Boy Color in 2000s by Rare, a prequel to the N64 version made famous as a pseudo-sequel to GoldenEye 007. You controlled Joanna Dark as she completes her training to become an agent of Carrington Institute and her first missions under the organization. This game is primarily played in the third person, with the player controlling Joanna in an isometric 3D view. The graphics, while blocky, are honestly impressive for these sections, with the animation moving fluidly between cycles. At first, you start with a rather long training section of the mechanics of the game, but then you go to multiple missions where you can go around fulfilling objectives, gunning down enemies and stealing their stuff, and honestly, it's really fun. This game also offers a first-person mode, but it's just like moving a mouse on screen, so just get it over with and move on. The game stresses that stealth can be a priority in some missions, but holy hell the enemies can be frustrating to sneak up on. You're supposed to walk slowly and avoid reloading to not trigger them, but sometimes their killbot senses activate and they instantly target you even if not even looking in your direction. While you can get better at this is at its worst on the training stages when getting spotted means the mission has failed over and over and over again. Another thing about this game, no music during gameplay, which can be frustrating, but you do get voice clips, which on the Game Boy Color is pretty neat. This may sound like I'm actually negative against this game, but it's just some cons to an overall enjoyable package on the go. This game also includes a multiplayer mode that is fun to play with friends if you ever find your link cable. And also, cheats can be unlocked on the N64 version using the transfer pack. One thing is for certain, you definitely get bang for your buck this side experience. Now this looks cutesy, doesn't it? This doesn't gel with my hardcore pro MLG gamer calloused hands. So why should I or the rest of y'all play it? Well, hang tight, you'll find out soon. Wendy Every Which Way was released on Game Boy Color in 2001 and was made by Way Forward. Based upon Wendy from the Casper animated series, this game is a simple platformer, with the player controlling Wendy through the levels as she looks to find stars and make it to the end of the level to find moonstones. Wendy can beat her enemies with magic, but at some point during the first level, you reach a place where you cannot progress. This is where the game's main gimmick comes into play. Wendy can change the gravity at will, allowing her and enemies to shift from floor to ceiling and allowing progression through otherwise inaccessible areas. This mechanic is used throughout the game in some genuinely impressive level design and keeps players interested in continuing the game. Each world is split up between 3 side-scrolling stages and 1 horizontal shooter stage, with an extra world being accessible if you play this on a Game Boy Advance. This game is short, with only 4 or 5 worlds available, but the graphics and sound are rather advanced for the color, being on the late end of the lifespan of the console. But if you're looking for an interesting platformer to try out, definitely fly this way. Pocket Bomberman was released on Game Boy Color in 1998 by Hudson Soft. Technically, this game was released for the Game Boy in 1997, but it was also released as a better version launch title for the Game Boy Color, so I'm including it here. Classic Bomberman gameplay, but in a 2D vertical space. You control Man Bomber as he looks to blow up all the enemies and make it to the ending gate to go to the next level. As you blow up enemies and objects, all of the classic power-ups make an appearance, leading to bigger and more deadly explosions, which in turn leads to everyone's favorite pastime in this series, blowing themselves up with their own bombs. The change from a maze-like space to vertical platforms isn't too drastic, with ladders and other obstacles being used to simulate the same space. Pocket Bomberman is a pretty repetitive game, but overall, if you are craving that classic Bomberman gameplay on mobile, this is a game worth bringing about. This game also includes a jump mode minigame, which causes Bomberman to only jump, and which will only require the player to use bombs, which, depending on the difficulty chosen, can be either a little nice distraction or a mode made for all the people in life you hate. Let me be serious for a quick second. I'm not being hypothetical or joking for goofs when I say Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Color is the best Mario Tennis game, not only as opposed to the N64 version, but maybe overall in the entire Mario Sports series. Yes, that includes all the modern games and their advancements. Let me explain why. Mario Tennis was released in 2000, first for the N64 and then the Game Boy Color by Camelot and Nintendo. The N64 and Game Boy versions share the base tennis gameplay, but the mobile version adds in so much more. On top of the nice looking sprites and ported sound from the console version, you also get more courses, players, mini games, and even transfer pack capabilities. The big selling point, however, is the single player story mode, which is a full-fledged tennis RPG. You control the new student in a tennis academy, and you are tasked with rising through the ranks by playing the people who are ahead of you in both singles and doubles action with your new roommate. Along the way, you gather experience points by playing games, being tutored by instructors, and training using the available equipment, which can be used as you level up to upgrade your skills, including power, spin, control, and speed. These upgrades are continuous throughout your single player journey, which will reflect your character getting better and better. You can also equip different equipment, which can also affect your stats and lead to a competitive edge on the tennis court. The best feature, however, you can use your custom character outside of the modes to bully the various unlockable characters in single play mode, and can even import them to the N64 version to bully Mario into crying submission. This RPG mode takes this already great game to an even greater height, as this makes playing tennis over and over again a worthy investment that every Game Boy Color owner should have. For the people who know me, I have a, let's say, love and hate relationship with Quest 64. I've grown up with this game and played it in full on stream, twitch.tv/sleepyheaddre, but it undoubtedly has its issues, many issues. But did you know that Quest 64 has a full mobile Game Boy Color port? And not just that, but that it's actually good? Quest Brian's Journey was released for the Game Boy Color in 2000 by Sunsoft, an almost full adaptation of the N64 version, but Game Boyified. Brian's Journey actually fits the 3D adventure into a fully 2D sprite-based cartridge. And not just that, but does it well. The game actually expands on the story by giving Master Brian a voice and adding in additional information and plot elements that help smooth the story out. In the world, you can wander around talking to civilians, go into houses, and find spirits to help power up your magic. Battle is the same as the N64 version, although a little more clunky on handheld, but still usable. You get access to 4 different elements that each do a different attack formation, such as wind being a homing attack and water being a straight line directly in front of the player. As you level up, you get increasingly stronger attack spells and support spells that can be used outside of battle. While not having as many buttons as the N64, the Game Boy more than handles the challenges without too much difficulty. As someone who grew up with the N64 version and never touched this one, it was odd playing this and recalling all the locations and songs that were demade for the Game Boy version, and it being really good. Like, this could have been a modern demake, it's that good. While the N64's version faults prevent it from being anything more than a cool one-time playthrough, the Game Boy Color version is worth playing over and over again. Everybody knows the Game Boy and Game Boy Color were the stomping grounds for the monster collecting genre, headlined by the initial Pokemon games. The Dragon Quest monster games were also pretty popular in the Color handheld, but how many people have heard of the Azure Dream franchise that had an entry on the Game Boy Color? Azure Dream was released on the Game Boy Color in 1999 by Konami. It was a port from the PS1 game, but added in multiple things and also lost out on some things in translation. You play as Ko, the son of famed MIA monster trainer Guy, who on his 15th birthday is granted access to the monster tower at the edge of town where riches can be found, possibly at the risk of deadly harm by his denizens. He is at first accompanied by his father's familiar, a dragon named Coon, who came to him with both memory loss and a powerful fireball attack to protect him as he scales all the floors of the tower. Gameplay of Azure Dream includes venturing up the randomly generated tower, starting from the first floor each time. Your actions include hunting for treasure, monster eggs that can spawn into collectible familiars that you can use in battle, and other such spoils, while battling the occupants of the tower in action turn-based RPG gameplay on the way up in order to find out what happened to Ko's father. Combat consists of moving through square movement spaces and positioning your familiar to attack enemies, also taking turns moving and attacking. Ko can equip himself to fight as well, but without the help of his familiars, he is DOA. This game goes in a different direction in the Pokemon franchise. However, it's not at all to its detriment. The Game Boy Color version of this game includes way more monsters in the PS1 version, as well as an extra underground dungeon that includes many more challenges and monsters to collect. However, It does not include the city building and romance options that the PS1 version includes. While this cuts out some heavy gameplay features, the bare mechanics of the collectathon game are enough to keep you occupied and even off the Pokemon game for longer than it takes to catch a legendary with Pokeballs. Now, don't look at me like that, I'm just as surprised as you are, but it's true. John Romero's super flop on the N64 actually produced a really good Game Boy Color game. Daikatana was released on the Game Boy Color in 2000, the same year as the original Daikatana. As opposed to Ion Storm on the main games, the Game Boy Color games were developed by Will and published by Kemco. Since an FPS on Game Boy Color was pretty much DOA, the game was developed instead as an overhead adventure game, very Zelda-like in its approach. You control Hiro Miyamoto, a sword master who, after his dojo is attacked and friend is kidnapped, must go around level after level in different time periods, battling the rival Mishima clan in the hunt for the legendary Daikatana sword. You move in a top-down screen-scrolling perspective with enemies spawning on screens along with items that can be picked up and puzzles that need to be solved in order to progress. This game also features dungeons that have a boss at the end that need to be defeated in order to progress. All of this is not so much Zelda-like as opposed to a different plot wearing a Zelda skin, but what's wrong with that? The mobile game, as opposed to the console versions, is pretty absorbent. The game is fun to play and explores the various areas in order to find a way forward, and all of the weapons you can get keeps the combat interesting from level to level. I would like to say maybe if this was the only game released in the Daikatana franchise, then maybe the series wouldn't have such a toxic reputation. But then, how would John Romero make us his bitch, repping a cyberpunk Legend of Zelda? Okay, show of hands. Who even knew before this video that Shadow of the Ninja on the NES had a sequel at all? Return of the Ninja was released for the Game Boy Color in 2001 by Act Japan and Natsume. A sequel to the 1990 NES game Shadow of the Ninja, Return of the Ninja retains the original platforming gameplay. You choose between two ninjas, Tsukikage and Sayuri, and are set loose to recover various shinobi tools to master the art of ninjutsu. A basic beat-em-up with stealth mechanics, each ninja traverses across each level with a close range attack and a two-layered projectile attack that's differentiated by each ninja. Holding for a little bit will unleash a small shuriken attack, but if you hold it all the way, you unleash a bigger attack. You also have a sub-weapon that you can only use if you have a Magatama in your inventory, which varies by item but overall performs a partial screen clearing move. Also hidden around levels are items which unlock more moves for your ninja to do, such as backflips, climbing walls, and digging in the dirt. The various ways you can get through the enemies make fighting generally enjoyable, though you are generally encouraged to actually be a ninja and avoid being spotted. The rank at the end of the level is also affected by how many times you were spotted and how quick you finish the level. If you enjoyed the original game released 10 years prior, then you'll enjoy this just as much or even more. Though because it's released at the tail end of the Game Boy Color's lifespan, I don't blame you if this gem fell through the cracks. Now let's end off this list with a game starring a Disney icon. No, not overrated Mickey. There we go, the best of the original three. Donald Duck Going Quackers was released in 2000, first for the Game Boy Color, then was released for the PlayStation, Windows, N64, Dreamcast, PS2, GBA, and GameCube. A simple platformer starring Donald Duck on the hunt for Daisy, who's been kidnapped. The GBC version is a strictly 2D affair, which is different from the rest of the versions, which offer shifts to a 3D perspective. Donald can gather collectibles and jump on enemies to defeat them, while looking for a scroll in each level. One hit, and Donald gets pissed. Second hit, you lose a life. The swirling pickup causes Donald to go berserk mode, where he runs and destroys everything in his way, including walls and hatches on the floor. The jumping is tight where the platforming doesn't feel cheap, and all of the pickups help the game not feel unfair. The game may start easy in the jungle levels, but as you progress, the game actively gets a little challenging, with the later bosses becoming major threats. The game is simple, to the point, but provides an excellent portable adventure to keep you occupied. The other versions may offer advanced graphics, but nothing can beat a solid, tight 2D adventure. Have any other games that should be on this list? Leave them in the comments, and look forward to a new advanced list in the future. You've seen the best, now let's look at the rest. Being unlicensed by Nintendo meant companies could get away with a lot, like barely having a game a lot. Sure, there's a chance that an unlicensed game could be good, or at least playable, but these games are among the most awful to ever be crapped out by these outlaw mud show companies. Live from my jail cell in no particular order, here are 10 of the worst unlicensed NES games. So let's get this repeat stinker out of the way, since it's probably the most famous example of an unlicensed game on the console. Action 52 was released on the NES in 1990 by Active Enterprises. A complete compilation of games you wouldn't want to play on your best days, Action 52 was marketed as a complete steal. 52 games for almost $4 each, totaling up to nearly $200. That would be a steal if the games were competent, but no, they were all either broken, non-responsive, or just non-fun. Each game fell within a few standard archetypes, such as the vertical and horizontal shooter and platformer. It doesn't do them right, by the way. I would like to say that there was at least one game that can stood out and redeem itself from the rest, but there really wasn't. Even Cheetah-Men, which Active Enterprises wanted to spin off as its own media franchise, was a buggy, broken mess. This is bad enough to warrant another place on the list, but hang tight, cause it can get even worse. Those madmen! They actually did it! They made a Cheetah-Men 2! Because one dead cat wasn't enough for these heartless fools. Cheetah-Men 2 was released on the NES in 1996 by Active Enterprises. The confusion starts at the cartridge, as this looks just like the Action 52 cart. See, but look here, that says Cheetah-Men 2 on this little sticker, so it must be true. This game was actually not meant to be released, with development being stopped before game completion. But in 1996, a warehouse full of 1,500 copies was found and eventually sold off. So some lucky so-and-so ended up with a turd encrusted with fake jewels. You again play as the Cheetah-Men, Apollo, Hercules, and Ares. Oh wait, that's right. Each Cheetah-Man is playable for 2 of the 6 levels, but the Ares levels are inaccessible due to a bug. You can only play those levels using a patch ROM by hackers, or by just being lucky and starting there when you start a new game. Although, you aren't missing anything by not playing these, as it's the same format as Cheetah-Men 1, with the broken platforming, inability to hit anything lower than you even though most enemies are on the ground, and the boss subhuman monsters just being all around pains to deal with. If one dead cheetah wasn't enough to deal with, now you have 2 to funk up whatever room you're in. Master Chu and the Drunkard Who was released for the NES in 1996 by Joy Van and Color Dreams. Color Dreams might not sound familiar now, but I have an interesting story about them later. You play as Master Chu, a warrior who is fighting against the Hindu god Shiva, who has cursed his village. Along with him in 2-player mode is the Drunkard who after getting his ass handed to him by Shiva, resorted to drinking apparently, though that doesn't affect gameplay in the slightest. You go around each of the 10 levels, shooting power balls at everything, hoping to uncover all 8 symbols of harmony, which are represented by these red and white yin-yangs that only appear when a correct piece of the background is hit by a projectile. After finding its symbol, you fight a boss at the end of the level and repeat. Now, finding the symbols isn't the worst part. No, that's the gameplay, and in particular, the bugs. Oh, the bugs. One button shoots and the other is supposed to parry projectiles, but guess what doesn't work? If getting lit up by projectiles is any indication, you'd realize that that button is pretty useless. And that's a lot of the game really. On top of not working correctly, it's also not very fun. Once you realize what you are doing, every level devolves into shooting everywhere and hoping the symbols or good power-ups show up. Sometimes you can be shooting exactly where something should show up and it just won't for some reason, but walk off screen and come back to try again, and there it is. Boss fights aren't interesting either, with a lot of repeat bosses not switching things up tactics-wise. This game doesn't really produce anything really. Even if the game worked 100%, you'd much rather be wanting to play something else. You guys know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, right? Girl in red cape, picnic basket, dirty ass wolf, grandma. If you know, you know. Now, what about Little Red Hood, wandering around a forest, avoiding random hostile humans and animals? Shrill whistling every time she jumps, and gathering cherries and looking for keys to get to the next level. Same story, right? Little Red Hood was released on the NES in 1989 by Joy Van. Your goal is to go through the level, gathering fruit from trees, and find the basement that goes to the next level, though you need a key first. How do you find this key? Well, go into the other basements and you might find it. But that's only for some levels. Sometimes you have to get around this bear that will kill you in one hit. But anyway, get the key and wait, where's the basement? Well, you have to get more fruit obviously to make the basement show up. All of what I said is not explained to you, so you have to randomly press buttons to even figure out that you can get fruit from trees, because the knock button doesn't respond otherwise. And if you don't get enough fruit, you'll be trapped in the first level forever. This game is frustrating, broken, and not worth playing for very long, which is what I should have realized before I spent an embarrassingly amount of time trying to figure out how to progress. Because even once you do, your reward is playing more Little Red Hood. I'll just go ahead and pass. Dudes with Attitude was released for the NES in 1990 by American Video Entertainment. This game is an action puzzler, I think. I say that because despite being named Dudes with Attitude, nothing indicates in gameplay that this would be represented. I guess because the playable characters are various smiley faces with glasses? Are these the dudes with attitude? What pissed them off so? Is it because their game is pretty crap? The goal of each level is to eliminate each of the jewels and make it to the exit of each level. The jewels themselves are different colors and can only be broken with a smiley face of the same color. Now, how do you change colors? Well, the dudes can only move from side to side themselves, with the player adjusting their vertical position. But the dudes must collide with the different paint cans that change color and break the jewels and blocks of the same color. In further levels, you have obstacles and enemies to avoid, but that's essentially the gist of the game. Now, does this sound like a game called Dudes with Attitude? You'd probably expect more likely a beat 'em up like Bad Dudes. Instead, you get a bland, boring puzzle game that is more frustrating than enjoyable. The puzzle aspect isn't even deep. You just bounce around hoping that one bad angle won't cause you to lose minutes of progress because you fell headfirst into a buzzsaw on accident. Tetris, this is not. Now, I've never liked the original Troll Dolls. Give or take, I enjoy the modern designs a lot better. I just always thought they were creepy and for good reason. Look at this thing's eyes. There's no life there. Games starring these hellions were never really good either, and this is no exception. Trolls on Treasure Island was released on the NES in 1992 by American Video Entertainment. And wait a minute, this is just Dudes with Attitude with a troll facelift. Like it's literally the same concept game, only you get trolls and weird troll faces. To be fair, you get new, easier puzzles because trolls, I guess, in different maps to differentiate itself. But if you're bored with Dudes with Attitude, yeah, just go ahead and skip this, it's not worth it. Wally Bear and the No Gang was released for the NES in 1992 by American Video Entertainment. You star as straight-edge Wally Bear as he is on the way to his uncle's house for a party. But on the way, you must avoid various animals who want Wally dead, and worst of all, drug users who want nothing more than to get Wally hooked on smack. Along the way, Wally must save his friends from drugs and alcohol and leave an important PSA message in the meantime. Isn't this so wholesome? No, the gameplay is utterly choppy, and it feels like Wally can barely ride his skateboard to boot. You know how people complain about the birds in games like Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden? This is even worse, as every level above ground have them flying in confusing arcs that are sure to kill you at least once. Your goal is to make it to the end of each level, and you go from above ground to the subway every single time, which on top of being repetitive as hell, is just so boring. Wally, you're a good kid, but this game didn't need to drive me closer to drugs. Wisdom Tree as a developer has an interesting story. Starting life known as Color Dreams, who I mentioned before, this small company released a few unlicensed games for the NES. Nintendo, not getting anything from the company, threatened to stop working with retailers who stocked unlicensed NES games. Feeling the pressure, Color Dreams soon had an idea. Why not rename itself Wisdom Tree and begin to market their products as religious Christian games, which could allow them to be stocked in Christian bookstores who wouldn't be as affected as much by Nintendo threats. Plus, religious video games were an untapped market, so it's a win-win either way. This led to many of the previously released games under their banner, such as Menace Beach, receiving a facelift and being re-released with some biblical changes as Sunday Funday. Sunday Funday was released for the NES in 1995 by Wisdom Tree. It includes 2 separate games to make the game a value purchase, with one called Fishfall and the other called The Ride. One is a monotonous grind of grab hand, and the other is a sing-along. Both not good add-on games, which is what leads it to be on this list. Menace Beach by itself isn't very good, but to be called among the worst? Close, but I don't believe so. In Menace Beach, you control a boy on a skateboard on the quest for his abducted girlfriend, fighting ninjas and other henchmen along with poor platforming controls each level to get closer to saving her. In Sunday School, the ninjas and henchmen were replaced with boys and plumbers, and your quest is to make it to Sunday School. This little bit of chicanery along with the extra games pushed Sunday School past Menace Beach and onto this list. Bible Buffet was released for the NES in 1993 by Wisdom Tree. Now, you see the name Bible Buffet and immediately think, is this an educational game, eating game, Bible action FPS? No, silly. It's an overarching board game which leads to short action levels similar in look to a combined Legend of Zelda and Bomberman style game. The ultimate goal is to spin the wheel and make your way to the end of the board. But the goal for each action level is to find the exit to lead back to the board game. Action stages are based upon what section of the board game map you're on, and you're allowed to bring things you may have won from the board game already, including most prominently keys. What you aren't prepared for are the religious quizzes that you cannot answer because the questions aren't included in the game, just the answer sheet. The questions themselves can be found as part of an instruction booklet sold with the original game, so good fucking luck finding them to play this obscure, boring game. Did I say boring? Cause yes, it is indeed long and boring. The board game portions are uneventful, and depending on your rolls, can go really slowly because the map is massive. While the action stages are playable, and using bombs to blow up enemies is slightly satisfying, they can't save this ungodly mixture of a game and its boring spinning learning intentions. Exodus was released in 1991 by Wisdom Tree for the NES, Mega Drive, Game Boy, and for DOS. Similar to The Legend of Zelda, but instead of an overarching adventure as your goal, you play as Moses and need to collect all the pots in a level to move on to the next. Now, you could probably have made a very enjoyable action game with the story of Moses, but instead, why not just collect more pots and literally quiz the player about Moses' life for in-game benefits? Yes, this game also features Quizlets like Bible Buffet, but they actually have the courtesy to include the questions in this game. During the level, Moses can throw projectiles which can destroy most things, which you need to clear in order to find all the pots, which may sound entertaining at first, but my god is this game grindy. Every new level will appear and you'll groan out of pure boredom. The game, while competent, is just so monotonous and will barely hold anyone's attention past a couple levels, which is not what you want out of a video game purchase. The pixel art and the cutscenes are pretty good though. Have any other unlicensed stinkers that should have been on this list? Leave them in the comments. Thank you, and have a good day on the outside. Bad games are the best games. No, I'm not being completely ironic here. Bad games are often the most fun to talk about, even if they aren't the most fun to play, because you automatically discard most of your critical brain to just enjoy what the game half-ass serves you with a smile. Reasons why watching terrible B-movies are a bonding experience. Now, these 10 games aren't the only bad games on Super Nintendo, but 10 that automatically come to mind first. We'll get to the other ones eventually. In no particular order, here are 10 of the worst Super Nintendo games. Well, what's a better time to cover bad games than to bring up Rise of the Robots for Super Nintendo, a fighting game favored by no one. This game was released in 1994 for initially the Amiga, then ported to the Super Nintendo, 3DO, and Genesis by Mirage and Time Warner. You control the android as he clunkily fights his way against 6 other robots, mostly by jump kicking and sometimes getting a special move out. This game is the definition of bare bones, with only an arcade mode and versus mode available. And even worse, player 1 always has to be the android. This could be overlooked if the fighting was fun, but it really isn't. The game sacrificed gameplay for admittingly impressive visuals and animation, but the game moves like me on a treadmill. Nowhere. No combos turn the fighting into a spam fest, to the point where even playing the game is unsatisfying. Nothing to see here, folks. This robot needs more work. First-person shooter games usually took a large hit coming from PC to console in the 16-bit era. Doom, as famous by the red cart, looks like it's being censored for nudity. Now if Doom, one of the most important FPS games in history, came out resulting like this, what chance did Faceball 2000 stand? Even if it was being ported from the fucking Game Boy? Baseball 2000 was released in 1992 on initially the Atari ST as MIDI Maze, then ported to the Game Boy and followed up by the Super Nintendo by Bulletproof Software. You know how most games of this nature have you shooting bad guys or demons or something? Well, how about smiley faces? Yeah.
Okay, hold on, okay.
Also, you like playing your shooting game using a mini view of the screen? It's real nice. Honestly, this Windows screensaver of a game is just unpleasant to play. Between the screen scroll hurting the eyes and enemies being cruel to the point of frustration. Just who the hell thought getting bullied by Face from Nick Jr. was a good idea? Another bad fighting game, and one wearing a celebrity mask at that, this time bearing the unfortunate face of Shaquille O'Neal, basketball icon and cereal product endorser. Shaq Fu was released on Super Nintendo and Genesis in 1994. Shaq stars as the main character in a menagerie of combatants fighting for whatever reason. Shaq himself got isekai'd in the second world and must save a child to return, and everyone else fights because they are racist. Like Rise of the Robots, the animation on the sprites are really good and fluid, but also like Rise of the Robots, the fighting is super janky. It feels like all of the characters are stuck in mud when they attack, and don't even try jumping unless you want to almost immediately get punished for it. Shaq is also the worst character in his own game, so guess who you have to play as in the story mode? Honestly, I would say the game is worth a playthrough, just to see how bad it can get at points. Movie-based games were hit and miss in this time, with way more misses than hits. A game that validates this argument on Super Nintendo, Batman Forever. Batman Forever was released in 1995 on Super Nintendo and various other consoles by Probe and Acclaim. A third-person beat-em-up, you guide Batman and Robin through a variety of levels emulating the plot of the accompanying movie, with various bat tools and collectibles at the ready. Now, you may see this footage and think, wait, this looks similar to Mortal Kombat. Well, this game uses the same graphic style as the console Mortal Kombat games, with a lot of the same animation as well. It works for a fighting game. It bombs hard as a beat-em-up game. Batman Forever is super clunky, especially in the maneuvering department. Batman has to use up to jump, which is already pretty bad to deal with getting around effectively. But then the combination of buttons you need to use to grapple up buildings and fall through floors makes this game an absolute pain to try to play. Not that you'd really want to play it past the first couple of levels, due to the tedious nature of fighting and even trying to attempt a special gadget move. Just another bat fail to add to the bat pile. Batman joke. Balls, balls, balls. The best fighting game. Don't you remember playing Balls? You know, Balls. Where balls fight against other balls, with balls till one balls reigns supreme. Sounds fun, right? Balls was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and the 3DO, and was made by PF Magic and Accolade. A one-on-one 3D fighter. You control your combination of balls that make a character in fighting another combination of balls. You've seen Ryu's Scorpion. Well, how about Boomer the Humping Clown? The fighting in this game is confusing and frustrating. Half the time you don't even know if you're hitting your opponents. And surrounding this absolute madness is the worst soundtrack in any game I've ever heard. Yeah, these random beeps and moans really gets me jazzed to fight. Just no. Arcade ports to the home console were usually hit and miss. Most fighting games that were amazing in arcade ended up with flawed but still acceptable ports, like the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat franchise. Now, if those games had some problems, how do you think Pit Fighter fared in comparison? Well, not well. Pit Fighter for the Super Nintendo was released in 1991 by Tengen and was absolutely butchered in the translation to the home market. First off, the detailed sprites of the original were downgraded to this pixely blur, and to compensate for not having as much space, the screen is stretched out to the max with no zoom in. So essentially fights just look like a mishmash of bland colors colliding against each other. I know the original Pit Fighter wasn't a masterclass or anything, so what does that tell you about how bad this one is that I have to point this out? Also, Pit Fighter wasn't exactly a long game in the arcade, so don't expect to get your money's worth. Space Ace in the arcades was a story-based reaction simulator, similar to Dragon's Lair. You watch an animated movie play out on screen, and when an object lights up in a certain direction, usually for a dangerous situation on screen, you must quickly react and move the joystick towards it to continue the story, or else you get a frustration interrupting death screen. Now, these games were absolutely gorgeous with hand-drawn animation from legend Don Bluth. So how the hell could this be ported to the 16-bit SNES? Well, first you take away the animation, the gameplay, the story, and basically the fun. Space Ace was released on the Super Nintendo in 1994 by Absolute Entertainment. Changing the original format, the console game is a top-down platformer game that is intercut with cutscenes from the original to at least resemble the story. This wouldn't be a problem, except the platforming is absolute garbage. Jumping is so janky, and having falling between platforms being instant death means you're going to die. You're gonna die a lot. Combat is reduced to shooting these aliens, and it's just all dull. It's so boring. You're better off dusting off a laserdisc just to play an arcade game copy of this. What you know about Bebe's Kids? Based upon a popular skit from late comedian Robin Harris' stand-up, where he talks about his experience with a new girlfriend, her son, and her friend Bebe's destructive children, Bebe's Kids was an animated movie that is pretty much ingrained in the culture. The game, however, deserves to be ingrained in quicksand. Bebe's Kids was released in 1994 by Radical Entertainment. In the game, you control either LaShawn or Khalil, two of the previously named Bebe's Kids, as they go around the amusement park, beating up mascots, getting pickups, you know, the usual beat 'em up fare. I say go around in quotation marks, as you move super fucking slow. It's completely tedious to even make your way around, let alone fight. Besides exclusive special attacks, fighting is bland, and the combined lackluster graphics and music makes Bebe's Kids one of the worst games on the system, by proxy of boring. Oh yeah, let's hit the road big time with this driving simulator. Race driving was released first in arcades in 1990 and ported to many different consoles in the mid-90s, including the Super Nintendo by Imagineering and THQ. This game is the sequel to Hard Driving and is very similar in concept of being a first-person realistic driving simulator where the car behaves roughly like an actual car, with feedback from the steering wheel, multiple ignition methods, and working car instruments like speedometer, fuel meter, oil meter, and such. The only real difference is the sequel adds more tracks and cars to use, though they aren't nearly as long as the original's only 2-path track. Now, how did the Super Nintendo port fare? Horribly. The game is unbelievably choppy, with the Super Nintendo graphics barely holding on for life. Second, while a short game is appropriate for the arcades, home games being able to be beaten in much less time than an hour is simply outrageous. Imagine paying full price for this game and being done with it immediately afterwards. No fucking shot. You don't even get the improvements at arcade because the system is limited. So getting this game is utterly pointless, and it should remain back on store shelves. Or in this case, some Goodwill garbage can. Now, I'm not a big Ultraman fan, which is not because of the kaiju genre itself. Matter of fact, if I gave the various series and movies a chance, I'd probably love them. Two problems there. My time is already fragmented between keeping a roof over my head and doing this stupid YouTube hobby. And Ultraman on the Super Nintendo sucked such shit when I played it, I was tainted for years afterward. Ultraman was released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo by Bandai. Another fighting game. You control Ultraman as he takes on monsters of the day in one-on-one giant kaiju fighting bonanza. The game is generally uninspired, with bland visuals and sounds, but soon, you realize you don't know how to finish your enemies off. Yeah, you can drain their life bar, but the monster won't stay down, and the game won't tell you what to do next. Turns out, you have to hit them with a full-powered energy attack. Then it's on to the next level, where you do the same thing, then to the next level, and you do the same thing, into the next level, and to the next level, and it's like that, over and over and over and I actually rented this game when I was younger, and after the first enemy, the difficulty curve goes up rapidly. It was so frustrating, and at the same time, not fun at all. And I have the same thought then that I have now, that Ultraman is ultra ass. Have any other bad Super Nintendo games that should be on this list? Leave them on the comments. Take care, and have a good one. Fighting games in the early 1990s were hitting their boom, with arcades jumping with all the different flavors of beatings. Street Fighter II kicked off the high point, with many other games joining in on kids and adults alike throwing their quarters away. Most of these games made the jump somewhat successfully to the 16-bit console generation, with these and brand new creations spoiling people for their choice and fisticuffs at home to bully the youngest in the house. However, some games tried to hop on that bandwagon, missed it, and ended up skidding hard on the pavement, especially on the Super Nintendo. And today, I'll pick out 10 of them for you all to not enjoy. In no particular order, here are 10 of the worst Super Nintendo fighting games. By this point, this game's legacy, or better yet infamy, precedes it, just because it's a really wild concept from start to finish. Shaquille O'Neal was one of the most popular NBA legends ever, and the game he wanted to make was a fighting game. Okay, whatever you say. Shaq Fu was released in 1994 for both the Super Nintendo and Genesis by Electronic Arts. The Genesis version is a little more crispy in regards to sounds, but actually has more characters, so the poor Super Nintendo version ends up on this list. Not that that's the only reason, mind you. As the fighting is sluggish, the computer actually cheats, and the story is really out there in terms of figuring out what the hell is going on. Shaq himself is the worst character with the worst moveset in the game, so that's a glowing endorsement from EA of what they think of the title character. The other characters are a mixed bag of abominations, with the demon cat girl and undead football player in particular being the cheapest. So you know, if your friend picks one of them, they deserve to be kicked outside in the cold. I've already talked about how much I was not fond of Pit Fighter in the arcades. Do you want to go even lower? Pit Fighter on the Super Nintendo. The graphics look like compressed garbage, and the fighting is even less responsive. If you weren't fond of the arcade game, why in the hell would you pick this up? Oh well. Pit Fighter was released in 1990 for the arcade by Atari and ported to the Super Nintendo and loads more consoles in 1991 by Tengen. You control one of 3 characters as they compete in an underground fight league to make that dollar bill, y'all. You can beat up your opponent, use weapons, get assaulted by the crowd. It's wild. Now, the arcade version looks like this, and this is the Super Nintendo version. Yep. An almost criminal downgrade. And no, it's not just the graphics that were heavily downgraded. The gameplay, controls, music, literally everything got nerfed in the home version. You know what actually got upgraded? The difficulty. This version is tragically hard. Like, you'd be lucky to get past the first fighter, let alone the pit boss Kane or Warrior or whatever. If you absolutely have to play this game, stick to the arcade. Okay, before you get to typing in the comments, let me explain. Mortal Kombat was released first in the arcade in 1992 by Midway, and then ported to basically everything including a fridge, but specifically the Super Nintendo, in 1993 by Sculptured Software. The initial game to the 30-plus year franchise, Mortal Kombat was the perfect antithesis to Street Fighter II. While Street Fighter focused on fighting mechanics and animated sprites, Mortal Kombat focused on violent spectacle and photorealistic graphics. This difference set Mortal Kombat apart and made it an arcade favorite for all the local degenerates that love to see people's heads get ripped off. So it's not a surprise this game made its way to the Super Nintendo. But what did they do to my boy? The graphics and music, okay, the downgrade stings, but it's understandable. But to neuter the violence and fatalities? Sweat? I don't even recognize you anymore. This small censorship due to Nintendo's policies at the time completely ruined the first Mortal Kombat game on a Nintendo console and drove an absurd amount of people to the Genesis version that could actually see blood and guts with a code. I love this series, but this version has to be noted as among the worst, at least above the Game Boy version. Furry fighting for the whole family. Brutal Paws of Fury was released in 1994 by GameTek and Eurocom for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, DOS, Amiga, and Amiga CD32. The plot of this game is a standard tournament, which is pretty common for fighting games, in this instance with anthropomorphic animals competing. This is standard fighting game affair, where you pick a furry character, beat up the other furry characters that are lined up against you until you get to the final furry character boss, the Dalai Lama. Nothing offensive so far, right? Well, actually play the game. You know what helps a sluggish game? The controls not working. Yeah, sometimes the buttons literally wouldn't respond, and you look crazy while the opponent murders you. Well, how about the special moves? Well, you can't do them! As you go through the arcade ladder, you go up in belt rank and also learn each character's special moves. That's pretty cool, right? Until you realize you have less fights to actually use them, making the mechanic burdensome. And when you're struggling to actually play the game you're trying to have fun with, you know you got a stinker on your hands. Rise of the Robots is not a good game. There we go, an entry right there. Okay, fine. Rise of the Robots was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and 3DO by various publishers, but developed on the Super Nintendo by Data Design Interactive. A futuristic fighting game, you control the android as he takes on other buckets of bolts, ranging from a Roomba to ED-209. Before I tear into this again, let me remind you that the animation is actually really good, with the graphics and cutscenes actually being among the most impressive on the console. And the title riff by Brian May is good, I guess? Now the bad. Bad controls, not being able to play as anyone else in one player, not being able to not choose the cyborg in two player, horrible music, horrible game feel, it just keeps going on and on. This game isn't even fun to play as a joke with friends like the other games are. You'll just end up getting frustrated and throwing this game in a blender where it belongs. Oh boy, all your favorite superheroes, not Marvel, duking it out with the villains of the day, and a Superman mullet? What could go wrong? Everything. Justice League Task Force was released in 1995 for the Super Nintendo and Genesis by Sunsoft and Blizzard. Darkseid is added again with the attacking of Earth. And oh no, all your friends are clones. What do we do? Beat them up. So yeah, you beat up your friends, beat up a couple half-assed villains thrown in, then beat up Darkseid and you win. Yay! This game animates like ass. The sprites look good sitting still, but once they move, it all goes downhill. What helps out a bad-looking game? How about a bad controlling game as well? The special moves in particular deserve notice for being hard enough to execute, and not even worth it in the end in terms of damage. You get the feeling this game was developed by Marvel as a hit piece, cause I don't know how they thought this would endear itself to the DC fanboys at the time it was released. Though I can't imagine the chicken tendy throwing from here. Oh, Ultraman, what did they do to you? Full transparency, I never been too big in Ultraman, and I've only been slightly interested in Sentai, besides Power Rangers. Rest in peace, JDF, but even I know Ultraman is a huge property in Japan. Well, they didn't respect them that much, cause they let this game represented in the West, and my lord, they butchered my mans. Ultraman Towards the Future was released in 1991 by Bandai, you control Ultraman as he fights his way through the gauntlet of giant mutant monstrosities, using his attacks and various powers to blast him to Kingdom Come. Now, at first look, this game is ugly. Like, ugly. But whatever, giant monster fighting one-on-one. How could they mess this up? Well, by making the fighting super rigid and feeling like each attack has a delay. This doesn't apply to the opponent, by the way, as they will unload on you every chance they get, especially if they have a projectile. Ultraman's special attacks had to be charged up to be used, with the fight only ending when the opponent's health is drained and you wait to use the strongest attack on them. So if it misses, tough shit, wait for it to charge again. I already wasn't enjoying myself playing this, and you give me the middle finger while doing so? Well, guess what's going in the trash can? Now this looks like an innocent enough nothing burger of a game at first glance, right? Bland enough to look like a random Street Fighter clone, but escapes from the bottom with its decent looking graphics. Well, hold on there. There's a super entertaining story behind this game. Street Combat was released on the Super Nintendo in 1993 by NCS and Irem. You control Steven, a generic white guy with a mullet and alternate cyber costume suit, as he fights random dudes for whatever reason. I know most random fighting games have bare bone mechanics, but why does it seem like this game doesn't have much reason for it to exist? Why does Steven have 2 character slots? It looks like he in the future in the other one. Well, believe it or not, this game didn't originally look like this. In all actuality, in Japan, this game was based upon a classic anime series. The originally titled Ranma Half Chonai Gekikohen was originally released on the Super Famicom and was based upon the Ranma Half anime, where it revolved around a teenager named Ranma, cursed while on a martial arts training journey to change genders when exposed to hot or cold water, working to cure themselves along with their compatriots and enemies alike. Irem saw this colorful, goofy game and said, "Let me fix that," and absolutely sapped it of all personality, making it a bare bones, bland, and overall boring fighting game for the Super Nintendo for Western audiences. Which is such a shame, honestly, as more people should know about this series and the games it inspired. Not this one though, it's pretty bad. Another game based upon a real life person? At least this one is actually based upon a martial artist and not, Shaq. Doesn't make this game any better though. Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Gear, Master System, and the Jaguar by Virgin Interactive. This game is based upon the 1993 film of the same name and emulates the plot as best as it can. I say as best as it can, as it cherry picks what it wants to show and the random enemies you fight, such as a sailor, chef, and martial arts teacher, while leaving out some rather important information, including the romantic side plot. But who cares about that? Time to fight! Okay, never mind, I would not like to fight anymore. This game looks washed out, with the sprites not looking impressive and the sound design matching it. The fighting itself is super simple, not much more complicated than a beat 'em up, which, ironically, it could almost qualify as with how monotonous the fighting can be. You only play as Dragon, the Bruce Lee character, and all of the opponents are non-playable, even in versus mode. So I hope you and your friends have fun having endless mirror matches till you decide to finally turn the game off. I would recommend that you stick to just the movie and ignore that this even exists. Balls, balls, balls. Balls, balls, balls. Balls, balls, balls. Balls. It seems like every couple of videos I have to return to talk about this spiritual sphincter. Balls 3D was released in 1994 on the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and 3DO by PF Magic and Accolade. You pick your favorite balls as you fight with other balls before you fight the boss balls and balls them up. What else do I really need to say about this game? It's impressive that the game tried to mimic a 3-dimensional area fighter in the 16-bit era. Like if the various characters weren't an arrangement of spears, you could say that it's an ambitious game. I don't really know at what junction they decided to make the characters bouncing balls, but they really screwed the pooch. It's hard to tell what your character is even doing, let alone your opponent, and the complicated controls make this even worse. Add in the downgrade in graphics, soundtrack, and gameplay speed from the 3DO version, and you have yourself one of the worst games on the system. Have any other grapplers that should have been included? Leave them in the comments. Hope you have a good one. See ya! The NES was a stepping stone for Nintendo to begin their world domination of the gaming industry. From the smoldering ashes of the video game crash of 1983, a Mario-shaped empire emerged. Now, Nintendo may have started a bunch of good quality franchises on NES, but that doesn't mean every game got the new Super Mario Bros. U EX Plus Alpha treatment. There was a bunch of garbage released on the platform, whether certified by Nintendo or not, and these 10 are included in the junk pile. In no particular order, these are 10 of the worst NES games. Where's Waldo picture books are really underrated childhood amusement. Wasting minutes to hours, if you're me, looking around a crowded picture for a random striped nerd was a genuinely good time. Well, if it worked on paper, it should work on a video game, right? No. Where's Waldo was released on the NES in 1991 and made by Bethesda? Yes, that Bethesda, and published by THQ. You are thrown in a screen full of super ugly pixel environments filled with different colored pixel people and told to find Waldo with a decreasing time limit. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you look at the screen and say none of these look like Waldo because it's so hideous, but he's out there, mixed in between his multiple striped doppelgangers. Select the wrong thing and you lose time. Lose all your time and it's game over. But if you find Waldo, it's on to the next level. And yes, you must watch Waldo slowly walk to the next level every single time. The game is basically just this, though there are some mini games thrown in on some levels, such as finding Waldo in the dark, directing him in a subway, and slots. Absolutely none of this is really fun, and the game can be finished in less than 20 minutes. Yes, the locations are randomized, and the higher difficulty shortens the time limit and expands the screen, but it still doesn't change anything. Add in the lack of music, and you got yourself an awful experience. Waldo can stay lost for all I care. Friday the 13th has historically gotten a short stick when it comes to video games. The modern Friday the 13th game, while fun, suffered because of glitches, being repetitive, and a poor live service model that ended up killing the game. Literally. Friday the 13th on the NES suffered due to being cursed under the unlucky rainbow. Friday the 13th was released on the NES in 1989 by Atlas and everyone's favorite punching bag, LJN. You play as 6 different camp counselors around Camp Crystal Lake, gathering items, killing various animals and zombies, and saving kids. You know the kids are in trouble because you get a loud and a countdown telling you how long you have left. Gameplay devolves into going to different cabins to perform tasks like saving kids and counselors and lighting up fireplaces. When in a cabin, the game turns into a first-person adventure game where you explore the cabin for things and interact with characters if they are there. Of course, Jason is also wandering around as well and will normally attack you if he catches you outside. If he catches you inside, however, the game turns into Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. This game is very difficult, mostly because it's hard to figure out what to do. You're supposed to follow the plot of the film after being given an instruction to light all the fireplaces, but almost every other second the alarm goes and you have to stop everything you're doing to save another damn kid. Jason also loves to kill counselors, with his hits dealing massive amounts of damage. If you are going in blind, you aren't getting far at all, and you are most likely going to see the game over screen, as made famous by AVGN. NES games and beat-em-ups range on a spectrum. You could be on the Double Dragon end, where your version is actually more famous than your arcade original. You could be on the Mighty Final Fight side, that is a great underrated hidden gem. Or you could be on the Bad Street Brawler side, that makes bad dudes look like fine dining. Bad Street Brawler was released in 1987, first on the MS-DOS, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum, then receiving an NES version in 1989 by Beam Software and Mattel. This was also one of the 2 games designed to be used with the Power Glove, the Mattel-made accessory that puts a controller on your fist and made you look like a badass. But if this game is barely playable on a normal controller, how in the frick do you think you can fight using a prehistoric Kinect? You play as Duke Davis, tough badass who looks like the bastard child of Hulk Hogan and Duke Nukem with his bright piss outfit and the jarring colors of the background and enemy characters. It honestly looks like you're fighting in the world of Doug Funny. The fighting is mind-numbingly simple, with Duke having 2 striking moves mapped to both buttons and pressing them combined, unleashing a harder hit throwing move. But you can only move right on a 2D axis, making fighting and everything else super bland. You know what would spice this up? Changing what moves you do every single level. Yes, your moves change every level. It can be quite jarring to lose a good simple headbutt to this stupid twisting throw move. Each level is pretty much the same with few enemy changes, and it's super annoying to lose a life and have to start over an already boring long level. May Duke Davis forever rest in piss. Okay, if you saw the first worst Super Nintendo game video, you know I put Space Ace on there for not translating well to the system, but did you know they tried it even earlier with an even better arcade game? Dragon's Lair on NES was released in 1990 by Motive Time and CSG ImageSoft. Like Space Ace, Dragon's Lair in the arcade is a cinematic reaction simulator with art from Don Bluth about the knight Dirk the Daring saving the Princess Daphne from a horrible wizard castle and the dragon Singe. And like Space Ace on Super Nintendo, Dragon's Lair on console was side-scrolling garbage. The graphics for NES are honestly impressive, but holy shit, why are you so slow? They really made you go through every animation cycle just to make Dirk walk, and oh, I'm dead. This game emulates the Twitch style at arcade by making obstacles that you wouldn't see coming ahead of time stand in your way. So when you die, you can try to avoid it in the next life. This process is the entire fucking game. You cross a bridge, planks fall that you can't avoid, jump over the loose planks next time, a dragon kills you. Jump over the dragon, wait, that's not what the game scripted you to do. Now you're forced to die against the door. And this cycle continues on and on and on. Unlike the arcade, where you have a chance to save yourself the first time if you react quick enough, your sprite reacts too slow for anything in this game to not be an instant death, besides the small flying enemies for whatever reason. And it's infuriating, especially when you only have 5 lives and no continues, meaning you're gonna be playing the intro bit again and again and again. Trust me, don't fall into the cycle of hate. Avoid this one at all cost. Oh look, another well-known property that fell to the devious hands of LJN, who ended up with a lot of TV and movie-based licenses back in the day. Although superhero-based games nowadays vary quality-wise, they can all take pride that they weren't treated as poorly as X-Men in the past. The Uncanny X-Men was released on the NES in 1989 by LJN. In this game, you choose your level and what 2 classic X-Men you want to use, and oh my god, it's so ugly. Like, is this seriously how the game looks? The X-Men look like exchangeable box people, and combined with the bland pixely environment, it's so hard to even see. Anyway, you pick 2 X-Men and you travel across this scene, taking out enemies, grabbing items, and generally just finding out where to go. Each X-Men have their different abilities and stats, such as Wolverine having a close range high attack and Iceman having a fast long range projectile attack. This will be cool, but fighting in this is just one button tapping over and over again. So besides the difference between characters with projectile attacks and not, it's rather dull. While playing single player, the computer controls the second X-Men you choose, and wow, look at that AI intelligence. The computer is super likely to get caught on something or die easily, so why even have it around? Especially fun to give the computer a projectile character that will spam the attack button in the wrong way. Did I also mention whenever you use the projectile, it emits a loud ear-bleeding sound? If I didn't, I'm sorry I didn't warn you before playing this game. While future X-Men games aren't perfect, they can take solace that they aren't as bad as this absolute mess. The Legend of Zelda This Is Not. Deadly Towers was released for the NES in 1986 and was co-developed by Laner and Tamtex. You control Prince Meyer, who is contacted by a spirit wisp thing that tells him that the demons are coming led by Rubus, and he needs to stop them early before they come to Earth. From there, you're put in the start of the castle and basically told to let loose. The overall goal of this game is to gather the 7 bells in each of the towers by beating a boss and burn them in order to be able to attack Rubus. Now this sounds oddly familiar, like the concept of Zelda, right? In Zelda, you collect the 8 Triforce pieces from dungeons guarded by boss monsters and use them to get to a final dungeon and fight Ganon. So why is one game part of a legendary franchise and the other on this shitty list? Well, when Zelda puts you in a world by yourself, it gives you a small map and helps you keep track of where you are of recognizable surroundings and dungeons that, even when hidden, can be found with clues around the world. Deadly Towers, however, just drops you off like a dumpster baby and tells you to go on, figure it out. If you don't have a guide, you'll end up wandering around aimlessly till you die. In addition, Prince Meyer in his base form with no upgrades is absolutely weak and can only throw one sword at a time on screen, meaning you're going to die a lot. You can gather coins from defeated enemies to spend at these unnecessarily hidden shops, but have fun grinding for it. Honestly, once you get a better understanding of the base map and shop locations, you might be able to have fun exploring, but the difficulty curve is beyond unforgiving, and I doubt most people have the patience to sit through any of it. Oh no. Talking about officially licensed games is one thing. Adding in the Outlaw Mud Show games sometimes adds in an entirely new depth of awful, and one of the kings of that category is Action 52. Action 52 was released for the NES in 1991 by Active Enterprises and was also released in a slightly altered form for the Genesis in 1993. Action 52 isn't exactly your typical bad game. It's a grand compilation of bad games. Active Enterprises head Vince Perry wanted to create a multi-cart compilation for NES based upon illegal bootleg carts to the market to children and their parents as being cost effective. You can get 52 separate original games in one cart, and for the low price of $199. Holy hell! But you know, 52 games broken down is like a little under $4 each. It's probably worth it. Well, maybe if the games weren't broken dog shit, maybe more people would consider it. Every one of the 52 games fall into the following categories: side-scroller, horizontal shooter, vertical shooter, Donkey Kong style platformer, and Space Invader style shooter. All that changes are the sprites and environment, though almost half the games share sprites between who you play as and the enemies. Some of the games have broken controls, such as not being able to jump horizontally when you desperately need to, dying in midair, or maybe just dying if you don't press a button within the second of the level starting. If you're looking for fun in your brokenness, that's missing also. One of the special standouts of shittiness is a 50-second game, Cheetahman, which is another broken side-scroller that Active Enterprises thought would be their version of the TMNT, complete with marketization plans. Let's all laugh at their stupidity. The favorite game of retro gaming internet messiah AVGN, and I do mean favorite with quotation marks and extreme sarcasm. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was released on the NES in 1988 by Toho Corporation Ltd. Based upon the 1886 Gothic classic about the two personalities of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you control Dr. Jekyll as he makes his way through town where everyone is trying to kill him. No joke, these people will charge into him, shoot him with a slingshot, and even leave bombs to blow him up. Jekyll has a cane to defend himself, but it doesn't do anything besides kill bugs. When Jekyll's sanity bar decreases fully, he transforms into Mr. Hyde, where you can actually defend yourself, except instead of villagers you fight random monsters? Oh, and you actually walk backwards through the level until either you kill enough monsters to fill your sanity bar, lose all of your health, or reach the spot you traveled as Jekyll, in which case, Hyde incurs the wrath of God and is struck down. If I lost you trying to explain this game, you probably aren't alone. This game is ass backwards, making you play as defenseless, slow Jekyll to actually make progress. But don't turn into Hyde and maybe have a little bit of fun using fireballs in your fist to fight, cause that's bad. When even the game antagonizes you for trying to have fun, you know you should put the game down for your own sanity. Wrestling games really struggled on the NES. The technology was not advanced enough to really put in as much detail as necessary to make a really fun professional wrestling game, but the ones that tried really did try. It's just more often than not, it doesn't work out, which is tragic, especially when such a game was made about an anime based on the Ultimate Muscle / Kinnikuman manga and anime series. Tag Team Match Muscle was released in 1985 by Toho and Bandai. Although this franchise was popular in Japan, which led to it being a hot sell, the Kinnikuman franchise was relatively unknown in the Western market, and the few kids who got curious about it weren't rewarded for the effort. The game is a basic endless tag team match where you pick two wrestlers and continuously fight other tag teams in differing rings till you lose. That's really it. The fighting isn't very complex either. You can jump with one button and do moves with the other depending on what else you're pressing. More often than not, fights evolve into jump kicking till the trainer on the outside throws in a special pickup, which will allow either wrestler to perform their finishers for massive damage. That is pretty much it. You can tag out to your partner for a different finisher, but that's all you're gonna get out of this game. The graphics are very basic, with every wrestler differentiating by different colorways and slight characteristic changes, and the music is non-existent. Yep, no music at all. It's a shame, honestly. Kinnikuman could have been a strong early anime franchise in the West, but this game has probably not contributed to anything resembling a positive movement. Well, how about one more game based upon a popular IP for the road? Based upon the 1960s sitcom The Adventures of Gilligan's Island, the game The Adventures of Gilligan's Island was released in 1990 by Human Entertainment and Bandai. Now, if you hear based upon a 1960s sitcom and immediately think, why the hell would you make an NES game in 1990 about it? You probably wouldn't be alone. Gilligan's Island was about 7 people who were shipwrecked on an uncharted island in the Pacific Ocean, and their continued efforts to be saved. Now, when I say that, it sounds like a dramatic show, right? Well, no, it's a comedy. See, their plans always blow up in smoke due to the whimsical nature of First Mate Gilligan, much to the ire of the captain, nicknamed the Skipper. This show ran for almost 100 episodes, so how does it translate to a video game? Well, you control the Skipper to explore the island and avoid animals with Gilligan following you along the way. Mostly. I say that because Gilligan can get caught on things, fall through holes, and get caught in environmental hazards. Now, if you're like me, you probably just go about your business, but unfortunately, no one talks to you if you don't have Gilligan with you for some reason. So you constantly have to find and save Gilligan, or just yank him with a rope if you don't want to be bothered. This is compounded with continuous and repetitive dialogue from Skipper and Gilligan that just grinds and grinds and grinds. The accompanying game isn't much better. Skipper has a jump and a punch that doesn't affect most enemies, so you're essentially wandering about hopelessly swinging at air, while most enemies take chunks off your health. Along the way, you are tasked with finding the other stranded peoples, any useful tools, and finding your way to a boss at the end of each Wait, a boss? On a Gilligan's Island game? Well, yes. This game feels like it missed its window for the property. But since this game is based on a show in the 60s, I don't know what window it could have came out on. Maybe Gilligan's Island on the Magnavox Odyssey? Have any other bad NES games you want me to go over? Please leave them in the comments. See you later. Have a good one. Growing up as a Nintendo kid, I take no pleasure in crapping on the Genesis. No pleasure at all. None whatsoever.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But Sega soldiers, you have to acknowledge that your system has just as much trash as the rest of ours. I might not have grown up with a Sega system, but being old and dusty with actual income now, I was able to catch up to catch the whiff of the following games. Side note, no Shaq Fu, Rise of the Robots, or Action 52 on this video. They very well may deserve to be on this list, but I've talked about them before, and technically, the Genesis versions are superior to the other ones. In no particular order, here are 10 of the worst Genesis games. Wayne's World was released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Nintendo, DOS, and the Game Boy by THQ and Grey Matter. This game is kinda, sorta based upon the 1992 film, which was based upon the classic SNL skits. As opposed to a lot of movies based upon Saturday Night Live skits, Wayne's World was actually pretty good. Too bad that couldn't be extended to the video games. You control Wayne, as he and Garth are sucked into a video game at the arcade. Garth gets kidnapped by a gelatinous cube, and Wayne must travel across 4 levels to find his buddy and get out alive. This is a tall task, as everything is out to get him, including inanimate instruments. You can jump, rock so hard you shoot a projectile, and use any item you pick up, but you start out with 5 hits and 5 lives, and trust me, they will drain fast. Wayne gets attacked by sentient mixtape equipment, and every time he gets hit, he has to say, "Not." This is amusing the first time, and turns into rip your ears off irritating the next 100. The voice lines in general are actually really good quality, but they never shut the heck up. The jumping is clunky, you'll fail to see some of the dangers as the graphics blend in the stuff you need to avoid, and you have to start over at the start of each level each time you die. It's infuriating. The levels are structured after locations in the movie, after they've been shredded into hell, into multiple vertical platforms, and it is all too easy to get lost. I wouldn't be surprised if people got stuck on the first level and just said screw it, because the gameplay doesn't back up the frustration you'll go through just trying to play it. Oh yeah! Strider was an awesome hack and slash platformer in the arcades. Strider Hear You was awesome to control, and him slashing his sword through the different types of mechanical horrors that oppose him was super satisfying. Strider Returns takes that formula and absolutely ruins it and lands it on this list. Journey from Darkness, Strider Returns, was released in 1992 for the Genesis and Master System by US Gold. This game is technically a port from a 1990 release on Amiga and other consoles that was released in Europe. If you are confused and are asking, didn't Capcom develop the first one? You would be correct. US Gold handled the porting of Strider in European markets and commissioned their own sequel to the series, with Capcom's half-hearted permission. Capcom themselves would make a Strider 2 in 1999, and it completely ignores the existence of this game for good reason. Strider, nicknamed Hinjo in this version for some reason, gets nerfed hard. He moves so much slower than the original and is less mobile overall. You can still swing your sword from a distance away, but is it me, or is this not nearly as satisfying sounding? You get the ability to throw shurikens in this version, as opposed to a gun in the original European release, but overall, that's the bare minimum advancement you'll get here. Strider Returns is overall a disappointing step backwards for this series, with which what we know now makes sense, but back in the day upon release, people probably thought the Strider series had fallen off or something. Good thing this didn't stick, as not having Strider Hear You in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would make future Dre sad. Everyone run! It's environmental propaganda coming for you! Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt was released for the Genesis in 1993 by Tengen. Another mascot platformer released during the age where they were everywhere. You control Awesome Possum, the tubular dude working to save the environment, picking up one thing of pollution at a time. Dr. Machino is a nerd whose whole goal is to send his robots to pollute the earth, and it's up to you to stop it. You run throughout each level Sonic the Hedgehog style, not even joking. The momentum resembles Sonic something heavy, picking up cans and bottles and destroying robots to save the trees. In between levels, you both get bonus levels and environmental quizzes that test how much of an environmental ally you are. Get it wrong, and the council of animals will eat you. Now, all of this sounds good, but is it fun to play? No, not even fun to look at. The graphics are especially eye-straining, with the sprites blurring into each other and obstacles coming out of nowhere because 1, how ugly the game looks, and 2, how fast Awesome Possum will run right into traps. The sounds aren't much better, as each bleep bloop song and sound effect grates more and more on your nerves the more you play on. Add in the game being able to talk to you over and over again, and a fun little side addition turns into full-on cheese grater to the eardrums. All of this combines with the preachy environmental message to turn into an overall unpleasant experience that won't motivate you to help the environment, instead, probably inspiring you to throw empty cans into a river. Please don't do that, you'll make the turtles cry. Dark Castle was released in 1991 for the Genesis by Silicon Beach Software after being ported from the Mac and released on various platforms over the years. A platforming game, You control Prince Duncan as he is on the hunt for the Black Knight to protect his townspeople by running around the Black Knight's castle willy-nilly. Okay then. You are given the choice of 4 paths that each lead to a different set of levels, with Duncan running and jumping around the various obstacles. He can defend himself with rocks, but otherwise, the only other thing you can do is avoid enemies and traps alike. Platforming is especially tedious in this game, with Duncan always jumping a little too far or running right into what is probably a trap that will cost you a life. He can also get disoriented by walking into walls or falling short distances, which will probably cause death as you can't get hit by anything around the castle. You only get a set amount of lives, which, once they're gone, whoops, gotta start back over back at the castle entrance. While the original was lauded on the Mac, this version is almost an insult with how unfair it feels. The difficulty in finding out what to do to make it across each screen will drive you insane, and each time you die to the controls, you'll lose a little more sanity till you decide enough is enough and shut the game off for good. Honestly, other similar games on the platform do this concept much better than Dark Castle, so go seek those out and avoid this. American Gladiators was released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Amiga, and DOS by GameTech. This game was originally released for the NES in 1991, but the Genesis version deserves special mention for being the worst one out of the bunch. Based upon the game show from 1989, you control a contestant as they go through multiple events of the TV show against either a computer-controlled opponent or a human, and whoever has the most points by the end wins. And that's it. Really. That's all the game is. You can do a short tournament mode, but essentially that's the whole game. Well, does the individual events salvage value for this? Kinda. You have 6 events throughout the entire game, including Joust, Assault, Powerball, Atlas Spear, The Wall, and the Eliminator, and they all perform decently well on the platform. Powerball and Atlas Spear with the individual nature can be kinda janky with the scoring placement, and Assault, Joust, and Eliminator have confusing ass controls. But the games are indeed games. But is this all you really want? Playing these 6 mini games over and over again and calling it a day? The kids that received this probably weren't pleased with the experience being over in less than 30 minutes, and you'll probably not be satisfied either. Now, why is the Genesis post on the worst list? Well, quite easily actually. It features 1 less event than the other consoles. Yep, Human Cannonball, as minor as the game is actually missing from the Genesis version that the others actually feature on their platforms. While it's not a massive loss, it's still enough to add this game to the worst on the console. The original Hide Glide was an action RPG released on the NES that, despite its interesting ideas, didn't particularly land well, besides on multiple lists of awful NES games. So Super Hide Glide wasn't exactly starting off on the best foot, but despite the adversity, Super Hide Glide dropped confidently and immediately crapped the bed and pissed in it for good measure. Super Hide Glide was released on the Genesis in 1989 by T&E Soft, being ported originally from the MSX, which was released in 1989. Now, Super Hide Glide includes a lot of cool additions. You can choose what character type you want to use in the beginning. There's a day-night cycle, a morality mechanic, and other really nifty additions. If these were in a better game, it would probably be applauded. Instead, it's wasted on this pixel nightmare. The game is hard to look at, and the sounds accompanying it doesn't help its case. This being an action RPG, you would expect some simple mechanics accompanying gameplay, but when it's hard to tell what your character is doing, you probably aren't gonna have a good time. But oh well, you try to do the normal RPG thing of buying equipment and fight some battles, and why am I so slow? Right, an encumbrance mechanic. You know what also surrounds that mechanic? Hunger. Don't eat rations for a long period and you will die. Stay up too late into the night? That affects you too. Honestly, everything will affect you and frustrate you till you don't even want to touch the controller for fear of death. That's the magic of a particularly bad game. Sword of Sodan was released in 1990 for the Sega Genesis by Enterprise Software and Electronic Arts. Initially released in 1988 on the Amiga, Sword of Sodan is a hack and slash in the loosest sense. You control either of 2 characters and walk your way to the right with enemies spawning on either side. You can't avoid them, so all you can do is swing your sword and oh my god, what is happening? The different buttons cause different swings of your sword, but trying to figure out what will hit enemies will drive you crazy. There's supposed to be different swings and stabs that affect enemies differently, but honestly, you'll probably stick with the overhead swing and nothing else. Bad guys will do the annoying shuffle in and out of your hit zone while gradually poking you for damage. And if they surround you, oh, you'll feel it in the lives column. Enemies will drop potions that do a variety of things that you must pause the game to use. And honestly, the combining mechanic is actually pretty cool, but the base gameplay is not. The slow pace of the player character combined with the confusion of actually fighting makes this game not fun to play. The blood effects are pretty cool though. Caliber 50 was released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis by the Visco Corporation. A port from the original 1989 vertical scrolling shooter in the arcade. You control an army captain as he runs across various screens, shooting all the enemies he comes across and saving his fellow captured men. America! USA! USA! You can shoot in all directions and pick up additional weapons, as well as commandeer vehicles in your quest to bring freedom to this freedomless land. Compared to the arcade, this game is ugly, but that's nothing new for arcade ports. It's just something kids had to grasp in the time. But the ugliness is only the first blotch among the many that befalls this game. The controls are really awkward, with buttons dedicated to turn clockwise or counterclockwise, which will cause you to fire in the wrong direction quite often. The enemies can down you in one hit, so trying to be careful with these button combinations seems like an oxymoron. The sounds are also very unpleasant, and all of this lead to a game that falls far, far apart from its arcade success on the Genesis platform. Ikari Warriors, this is not. The Last Battle, Legend of the Final Hero, was released on the Genesis in 1989 by Sega and further ported to the Amiga and Commodore. A side-scrolling beat-em-up, you control Arzark as he makes his way across the stage, attacking all the enemies that come into his view. Each level is composed of multiple stages that the player themselves can choose the path on, which can all range from standard beat-em-up stages, maze stages where you have to find your way out of each level, and boss encounters where you'll most likely die. As Arzark defeats enemies, he will fill a gauge at the bottom of the screen that, when full, will cause him to go beast mode and be able to punch at the speed of sound, while making very familiar noises. If this sounds like Kenshiro from the Fist of the North Star series, you would be correct. The original game in Japan was Fist of the North Star, the new legend of the post-apocalyptic messiah, and featured characters from the original series. Because the international version didn't retain the license, the graphics and characters were altered outside of Japan, sapping it of one of its only features. Even with it, this game is bad. Ironically enough, this was one of the initial Genesis games released in the US, and it does nothing to show off the capabilities besides the slightly better graphics that have also been nerfed by having the violence and blood censored. The gameplay is monotonous, the controls are a little wonky, and it's overly difficult to get through with no continues, saving you along the way. Just bypass this one, it's already dead. And to finish this list up, we have another Waldo video game that grips its way on the people's shelves without bringing with it the charm of the original source. The Great Waldo Search was released in 1992 on the Genesis, Nintendo, and Super Nintendo by Toy Headquarters. Like the original source, you are trying to find Waldo and other things amongst the crowded pages of each level. Waldo, his dog, a scroll, various clocks that extend the time limit, and points are scattered throughout each scenario with various animated sprites obscuring your view. Once you find Waldo in the scroll, the level is over and you can move on to the next. Finding Waldo's dog, Wolf, will trigger a short minigame where you collect bones for extra points, but otherwise does nothing special. While this game looks a lot more visually busy and impressive than the previous Where's Waldo on the NES, it unfortunately falls flat for a variety of reasons. For one, there's only 5 levels, meaning this game can be completed literally under 20 minutes. The other, Waldo ironically sticks out like a sore thumb during all of the levels, whether normal or expert difficulty. The fun in a Where's Waldo picture is having to scour the various aspects to catch a glimpse of him amongst the occupants. But this game doesn't quite have the satisfying feeling of finding him. Yes, finding the scroll is a little harder, but not that much to justify spending money on this game. If I received this game as a kid, I would have been pissed and thrown a fit. Not really, as I'd probably get my head caved in because my mother did not play those games. Have any other games that deserve to be on this list? Leave them in the comments below. Hope to see you again real soon. Well, my hardest NES Games video ended up doing very well, so apparently my audience really likes torture. Well, if that's what you want, then it's time for another CBT session. The Super Nintendo really was an upgrade in quality from the NES in pretty much all aspects. From graphics to sound palette to gameplay, all of it was made better with the new additions. Difficulty also made the jump from the NES, and in some cases, added some extra pain. And like before, I'm gonna list a few of the particular ones that will give you an ulcer. As a reminder, this list is just a sample, so if you were bullied by something not on here, it's completely valid. These are the games that, through either history or trial, have caused intense emotions to boil up inside of me. In no particular order, here are 10 of the hardest Super Nintendo games. So, disclaimer, a group of games on this list are going to be sequels to games that I highlighted in the NES video. This isn't like a legacy hire or anything. These games are just legitimately very hard still. Ghosts 'n Goblins on the NES was a very challenging platformer that was infamous for having to be beaten twice to get a true ending. And I'm very happy, sarcasm, to report the sequel continues the tradition with some extra pain thrown in. Super Ghouls 'n Ghosts was released on the Super Nintendo in 1991 by Capcom. You once again control Arthur, who must again save the princess from the demon emperor Bowser. I mean Sardius. Arthur must venture across 8 different levels, slaying zombies, devils, and other such baddies with his wide variety of weapons and armor. New to this game is the double jump, which when used right can help you get out of sticky situations or reach previously unreachable platforms. When used wrong, you'll jump right into an enemy or an instant death trap. You can't redirect yourself after you do the double jump, so you're left at the mercy of whatever lies at your feet. New weapons, attacks, and the gold armor come to help you this time around, but everything still breaks in one hit, so you better mind your movement before the end bosses do it for you. The game is difficult again in the first loop because of the relentless enemies and platforming, and having to do an even harder loop just to see a proper end of the game will drive you up the wall and double jump right off of it. Another sequel from the NES. You hear Battletoads and you already know what you're in for. Pain, lost lives, broken controllers. And to your benefit, this game fully succeeds in that regard. Battletoads and Battle Maniacs was released in 1993 for the Super Nintendo by Rare, though a port was also released for the Master System in 1996. In this game, the daughter of an important CEO and Zitz are kidnapped by the pigs and the Dark Queen inside a virtual reality game world, so Rash and Pimple must go in after them and kick butt. Gameplay is similar to the previous game, in which you beat up all the enemies on the screen to proceed to the next, with a boss waiting for you at the end. Final attacks are even more elaborate, making the action that much more satisfying to perform. But this is Battletoads. It isn't just a beat 'em up section. You also have your vertical scroller sections with numerous instant death traps. And in case that hasn't made you mad enough, here come the Turbo Bike section that drain your lives and continues. This isn't your standard Turbo Bike though. This is your even faster, even harder to control Turbo Bike. The amount of times I've gotten to this level without even losing a life just to completely crash out could feed families. And this is still early on in the game. You still have loads of levels of pain to go. If you want a challenge on the Super Nintendo, go somewhere else, cause the broken TV replacement bill isn't worth it. The Lion King was released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, DOS, Amiga, Game Boy, and the NES by Westwood Studios and Virgin Interactive. The scourge of 90s babies' childhood. You would expect a video game adaptation of a Disney movie made for kids to be simple, somewhat mundane. Nope, this game is brutal and not afraid to cause you trouble. You control Simba, first in child form, then in adult form in the second half of the game, as he makes his way across the savannah, across different levels, platforming across jungle environments, and defeating various animals including hyenas? If Simba could do this as a child in the movie, it would be a much shorter movie. Anyway, this game is notorious for its platforming, with one level in particular being a thorn in everyone's backside. The second level, titled I Can't Wait to Be King, is a complete roadblock in terms of kids trying to progress through the game. The level is essentially part puzzle and part twitchy horizontal scroller, with Simba needing to scream at monkeys, yes that makes sense if you play the game, to get them to throw him in the right direction. These are between the sections of level where you ride an ostrich to avoid barely visible obstacles, and the horrible platforming sections where you ride hippos with swinging tails. All of these combine to make the most unbearable level possible. Most people who own this game aren't even aware there is more after that level, and that's not kind as well. When you attract the reputation that this game had in the 90s and a pre-internet age, you know you're working with something vastly unpleasant. Want Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo, but even more cruel to the point where you want to cry at your TV screen? Boy, do we have the game for you. Castlevania Dracula X was released on the Super Nintendo in 1995 by Konami. This game is a port of the original PC Engine release, Castlevania Rondo of Blood in 1993, and is followed by the direct sequel game, Castlevania Symphony of the Night on PS1. You control Richter Belmont before his adventures in that game, as he must whip his way across different levels to save the captives and defeat Dracula. Due to the difference in technology, many things that had to be adjusted in the port, including different gameplay elements and new levels. What didn't get adjusted is the difficulty level. Unlike Super Castlevania 4, which was also released on the Super Nintendo, there is no 8-way directional whip, so hitting enemies is a lot harder in this game, which complements nicely with the increased amount of enemies heading towards you. Rondo of Blood also included game saves, which was replaced by a password system in this game. This will come back to haunt you when the platforming causes you to game over again and again and again. The platforming in Castlevania games is already not ideal, so having to scale this horrendous level design mixed in with instant death hits and erratic flying enemies is pure torture. While Castlevania 4 is the proper sequel to the NES trilogy, Dracula X could be considered a successor in terms of sharing the difficulty of the original games. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was released in 1993 for the Super Nintendo and Genesis by LucasArts and Konami. Despite its goofy title, this game is awesome. An overhead top-down run and gun, you control two kids as they go through level after level in a variety of different environments, killing zombies, ghouls, and various other creatures while saving their NPC neighbors before they get got. You can get a variety of weapons and items to help you on your way, like a water gun, soda can bombs, and even a bazooka. The challenge of each level is to make it to the various neighbors before the monsters reach them, in which case they are gone from then on. Being completely serious, you start out with 10 neighbors and must collect them all to move on to the next level, and if you lose any, they don't immediately come back. Difficulty then becomes getting through each of the 48 levels without losing all of your neighbors, in which case you immediately game over. You can get neighbors back by scoring enough points, but that will require you to continuously murder the undead and not get hit yourself. Enemies can easily swarm you and drain your health and lives, leading to a deeply frustrating game over. With the amount of lives in this game, you would think the password system would come in handy, but you also have to weigh not having the opportunity to get as much pickups in the later levels, which could screw you over when you come to a boss monster. While this game should be experienced, I warn you to be on your A game to avoid certain doom. Cyber Ninja breakdance fighting? What's not to love about this game? Well, the coronary for one, Hagane, the final conflict, was released on the Super Nintendo in 1994 by CA Production and Hudson Soft. You control Hagane, a futuristic ninja cyborg, as he platforms across multiple levels using all the tools in his repertoire to eliminate all the enemies in his way in the name of revenge against the clan that nearly killed him and his family. These tools include his sword, shuriken, bombs, and a grapple hook. Each have their own directional arcs and availability, but all will come in handy to prevent Hagane from turning into scrap metal. Hagane can also maneuver their way up walls and dash in midair to avoid destruction, which gives the enemies the green light to spam projectiles. Not even kidding, the enemies will rain objects against you if they aren't charging you themselves, and you can only take 3 hits initially until you can pick up health extending pickups. 3 straight hits without grabbing a health pickup, and Hagane gets put on a t-shirt. Once all your lives are gone, you gotta use a continue, and any checkpoints you reach are now void. And once all your continues are gone, that's it. Honestly, the game is pretty underrated. It's a fun platformer with cool mechanics, and didn't I mention you're a freaking cyborg ninja? I can only surmise that the only reason this game isn't more popular is because curious people who check it out don't make it far due to the difficulty curve. A shame too, as this game is worth the momentous stress headache you're bound to receive. Now, let me be honest with all of you. Literally any of the Super Nintendo games based upon the original Star Wars trilogy could be on this list. Every single one of them retains similar gameplay styles, and the levels are modeled directly after movie scenes. And they will pound you into the dirt unmercilessly. If I had to pick one as the most noteworthy, I would say the original, Super Star Wars, would be on this list, due to the fact that the sequels have advancements that, while not making the games any easier, does give you more options to defend yourself. Super Star Wars was released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo by Sculptured Software and LucasArts. Gameplay consists of various scenes from A New Hope, which you control Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, or Chewbacca as they run and gun throughout each action stage. You have a limited amount of lives and continues, so being careful is the name in the game. But it's hard to be careful when enemies can be this relentless. You start out with just a blaster, but the lightsaber becomes available later in the game and helps out a lot against the various enemies. Sandwiched alongside these levels are land speeder levels, which require you to defeat enemies in Mode 7 graphics, and an X-Wing section to reenact the final bombing mission from the movie. All of these combine to create a satisfying yet frustrating experience that should be checked out by both fans of the movies and fans of difficult Super Nintendo games. But don't be surprised if you end up force pushing your cartridge out of a window. ActRaiser has had its phrases sung to the high heavens by now. What started out as an underrated gem has turned into an undeniable juggernaut on the Super Nintendo. But did you know ActRaiser had a sequel? And no, not the remake on Switch, ActRaiser 2. ActRaiser 2 was released on the Super Nintendo in 1993 by Quintet and Enix. You control God as he goes around the world slaying demons, bringing peace one sword strike at a time. Tanzra the demon was defeated before the game starts, but his intense hatred spawns several demons based upon his 7 deadly sins, who strike chaos in the world. God, or the Master as he is known by his angel subordinate, then descends into conveniently located statues that happen to have a sword and shield and wreck house. The big difference between this game and the previous one is there are no town simulator sections in the game, leaving only the action stages to fill in the gaps. And they fill in the gaps by beating you down and picking you back up to do it again. Unlike the previous game, you are more nimble in your movements, which allows the Master to glide and attack in more positions than before. You also gain a shield, which can block certain projectiles, and a limited amount of magic, which changes based upon the stance in which you use it. These help, but not outright lower the difficulty of clearing these levels. In particular, the enemies can require a lot more hits to destroy, and there are a lot more environmental hazards that can instantly take a life. You have unlimited continues and passwords, so you're completely helpless, but this only serves to get you back to the levels so they can do it again. ActRaiser 2 may not be as acclaimed as the previous game, but it is definitely a worthy addition to the Super Nintendo roster that may also cause the blood vessel to burst. Speaking of sequels that deserves a lot more attention than it's currently getting, why hasn't there been an Earthworm Jim game in years? I mean, yeah, we know exactly why, but we shouldn't let that eliminate the good games that we got, including this absolute terror. Earthworm Jim 2 was released in 1995 on the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Saturn, DOS, PlayStation, and the Game Boy Advance by Shiny Entertainment. You again control Jim across a variety of wacky levels, including pig tossing, rocket flying, and blind worm digging. You know, the usual. The original game wasn't exactly a trip through baby's first platformer, but the common theme in all of the variety of levels is that you will die a lot. Besides the basic platforming levels that will test your patience, the amount of quick twitch action on the pocket rocket levels will stress your mental state real quick, on top of all the levels in which you use a gimmick exactly one level. Maybe if the game was a little more stable in just controlling Jim across a simple platforming stage, it would be a lot easier, but then again, it very well wouldn't be an Earthworm Jim game without it. You gotta take the weirdness with the rest, and with that, acknowledge that this game will grind on you down to the bone. And on the last stop of the hard NES game to hard Super Nintendo game pipeline, we have Contra making his grand debut on the big boy stage. Contra actually received a direct sequel on the NES called Super C, which was just as challenging as the original. So the third sequel on an upgraded machine definitely had its work cut out. Well, for all the insane people watching this video, I'm happy to tell you that this game fulfills all of that and more. Contra 3: The Alien Wars was released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo and Game Boy by Konami. You control Bill and Lance across 6 different side-scrolling run-and-gun levels of hellish war against the alien. By war, I mean spraying and praying because enemies and projectiles come frequently and heavy. As with the previous Contra games, you get different weapons depending on the pickups you touch, as well as screen-clearing bombs that will help out when you get a little overwhelmed. Also, like the previous Contra games, you die in one hit, so get ready to learn Death and Needs. Combine that with the limited amount of lives it continues, and you have a very short leash to try and make your way through. New to this game, replacing the base infiltration stages, are the overhead mode 7 stages that are honestly really difficult to control. People new to this will struggle to make any progress until they game over a couple of times. This is similar to the entire game, honestly. You'll continuously throw yourself at it, making chunks and chunks of progress each time, until you get to the promised land and beat the game. You'll feel so accomplished and feel like you can take on the world until you try for the true ending on a higher difficulty and get smacked right back down. Are there any other Super Nintendo games that should be on this list? Leave them in the comments below. Also, don't be afraid to follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/sleepyheaddre, where you might see me play one of these hard games. Hope everyone finds their inner peace from these games. Have a good one. Bye. NES Hard wasn't just a phrase, it was standard for most games that came out during the era. Unless, you're playing a Sesame Street game or something. Even Super Mario Bros., the most basic of basic NES games, is harder than you remember it being. And if you can't beat Super Mario Bros. In one sitting, what chance do you have against these super heavyweights? The following games are absolutely notorious for being frustratingly difficult, and it isn't limited to just these. There are loads of games on the console that can cause controller breaking rage. In no particular order, here are 10 of the hardest NES games. Battletoads was released on the NES in 1991 by Rare and was ported to the Genesis, Game Gear, and Amiga consoles. A let's say difficult beat 'em up. You control the Toads Rash and Zitz as they hope to save their brother Pimple and their friend Princess Angelica from the clutches of the Dark Queen. And by clutches, I mean through levels after level of crew obstacles stacked against you from the start. Rash and Zitz can defend themselves just fine with super exaggerated attacks and the use of weapons that can be dropped by enemies. That's not a problem. The problems come in once you get past the first level. If it isn't the enemies, it's the platforming. If it isn't the platforming, it's the turbo bike sections. These stages in particular will weed out most of the casual players, as trying to navigate through the quick approaching walls and pits is way more trouble than you think it is. And on top of that, that's just the third level. There's loads more torture waiting in the wings for you. The game itself and its mechanics are simple, which only compounds the frustration when you inevitably get stuck at a point that drains you until you game over. And with limited lives and continues, it's more likely you're starting over sooner than later. The Adventures of Bayou Billy was released in 1989 by Konami, a hybrid beat-em-up driving and shooting gallery game, all of which will actually beat the piss out of you. I'm not lying about that. Every enemy is so damn hard. Why does it take so long for enemies to die? Why can they drain my health in such a short amount of time? This is the first level. Do I really suck at video games? It cannot be overstated how difficult this game is, starting with the beat-em-up portions. You control Billy, as he's on a journey to save his girlfriend from this rich bastard instead of, calling the police. And yeah, enemies will mess you up very quickly, whether from fists to weapons or even damn crocodiles. This is one of the absolute hardest beat 'em ups you'll come across. And guess what? That's not it. The shooting stages you can use a zapper for, but even in their best days they were unreliable. So what the hell do you think they're going to do now? Better break that controller instead, trying to move a cursor across the screen. And how do you think the driving stages perform of all the other things in this game? Getting shot off the road has never been so easy. Honestly, one section of this game would be enough, but all of these combined together and some kind of unholy fusion makes an absolutely unfriendly grind to get through. Blaster Master is a good game. I have to preface this with that, just so you know this game is well liked, and that will also spit on you. Blaster Master was released on the NES in 1988 by Sunsoft, a hybrid run and gun and platformer. You control Jason, a random guy who, after chasing his pet frog down the drain, happens upon a tank called Sophia III and is then tasked with finding his now radioactive frog among the mutants inhabiting the underground and take out their mutant leader. Of course, this plot is completely different from the original Japanese version, but whatever, we are here to talk about how difficult this game turns out to be. You shift between two gameplay modes. First, with Jason controlling Sophia and platforming in a 2D space. Sophia is a very mobile tank, being able to move, jump, and shoot in 3 directions with either the standard cannon or the special pickup weapons that can be gained from enemies. Jason can get out of the tank if needed, but it is generally unrecommended due to the fact Jason can be smeared into the dirt quickly. It is required, however, when you come across small entrances which lead to the second gameplay mode, where you control Jason in a top-down shooter, where he must slowly walk around and shoot the various mutants coming for him. Both of these situations present their own difficulty issues, but both share that your health will rapidly get drained, mainly due to platforming and stubborn enemies in the tank and projectiles from mutants out of it. Compounded with a limited amount of lives and continues, and no saving a password for 8 levels, you have yourself a difficult game that will require more than a few restarts to get the hang of. Silver Surfer was released on the NES in 1990 by Software Creations. Based upon the Marvel property of the same name, you control the Silver Surfer as he is tasked with taking out other Marvel supervillains in their own areas, which you can pick and choose the order of. A horizontal and vertical shooter depending on the level, the Silver Surfer auto-scrolls through the levels, able to go in any direction in the plane that he is in, shooting silver pellets at the various enemies that come across the screen. The enemies will usually come up from the opposite side of the screen, and will come with their own projectiles that will cost a life if they hit you. There are power-ups that can be gotten that can change the way you shoot, but that's pretty much it. You get a limited amount of lives to make it through the 3-part levels with a boss at the end, but don't expect to get there if you aren't on your A game. This game is hard, part of which is because a lot can happen on screen at once, and the background doesn't help in distinguishing what is coming towards you. Enemies can spray just as much bullets as Silver Surfer can, and it can get downright nasty at points, with trapping you in between a projectile and the ceiling of the stage that can hurt you as well. It's probably better to continue pressing the button to fire at all times rather than stop, because you don't really know what's coming up next, and if it will have a magic bullet to shoot you out of the sky and set back any type of progress you've made. Frustrating doesn't even begin to cover playing this game for long stretches of time, so suffer if you really want to see the end of the game. Ghosts 'n Goblins was released in 1995 for arcades by Capcom, and specifically ported to the NES in 1986, among other consoles by Micronix. You control Arthur, Knight of the Kingdom, as he sits around the graveyard in his boxers with the princess. Side note, isn't this a little awkward situation to barge in on? What are they doing out there? Anywho, demon come, kidnaps girl, guy puts on armor and goes to war across 6 different levels of pain. And when I say pain, I mean Arthur runs in a 2-dimensional plane, shooting weapons at the various Halloween cartoon monsters. He can only take 2 hits from enemies, one that will break his piece of crap armor, and one that will turn him into a skull and bones. What you have to defend yourself is a short rotation of weapons found in hidden chests that have different arcs and deploy speeds, and a stubby little jump. That's all you get against the loads of Satan's minions, including ghosts, zombies, cyclops, and even butthole demons. I mean, demons that act like buttholes, not actual butthole demons. What would that actually look like? The saving grace of this game and its difficulty is that it's only 6 stages. 6 stages of pain, but only 6 stages. What? Illusion World? And I have to go through this again? What the? Yeah, you should have known just trying out this game that it was gonna be rough. And indeed, this game is rough. The whole series has a reputation for torture loving, and the initial game does not disappoint in that regard. Oh, the old guard of hard, the cream of the extreme, the rough of the tough? Oh, whatever. Contra was released first on the arcade in 1987 and released for the NES in 1988, both by Konami. One of the standards of the run and gun genre, you control Bill Riser and Lance Bean in 2-player mode as they run across the screen, gunning down any enemy alien soldiers or alien threat alike. You can run, jump, and fire your gun, and that's it, barring getting different power-ups from pickups. All of the enemies will be on you like white on rice with bullets, or just running into you, which will both cause instant death. You only get a few lives and a few continues, so you have to be utterly careful with how you play and try not to fall in any pits along the way. At the end of each level is a boss which will eat lives if you aren't careful, and you are on to the next level, which is usually a Fox 3D base assault stage, where you must start looking out for bullets in a new dimension. All of these levels are difficult, and combined with the limited amount of grace the game gives you for mistakes, makes this punishingly hard. Now, there's something I should probably address. A lot of people disregard the difficulty of this game because of the widely known Konami code, which gives you 30 lives instead of 3. At that, I say, get good and play the game without it and see if you really want to make that argument. Yes, scrubs. Alright, Castlevania 1 wasn't exactly an easy game, and although some people were disappointed with the way Castlevania 2 was handled, it was still a moderately difficult experience. So with a return to form for Castlevania 3, how did they handle the opposition? Easy! They turned it up to 11 and then broke the lever. Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, was released initially for the NES in 1989 by Konami. A prequel to the previous two games, instead of controlling Simon Belmont, we throw it to the past to control his ancestor, Trevor Belmont, who was vampire hunting in the 15th century. He's not alone, however. This game introduces companions that Trevor can meet along the way and join him on his cause. Each have their own special abilities that can be used during gameplay, as they and Simon switch out in the level on the fly, though only one can accompany him at a time. Castlevania 3 also introduces branching paths that can affect what levels are played and potentially what ending can be achieved. You know what else it introduces? Pain, sorrow, and an infinite amount of death. I don't know what in particular tips this game over the edge, be it the additional stages, more difficult enemies, and a punishingly amount of instant death pits, but they all combine to make a fun, yet torturous experience even more treacherous. Getting to Dracula would be a hell of an accomplishment by itself, but then he comes to stomp the rest of your hope out. This Castlevania adventure should be experienced by all, but only the most dedicated should tough it out to the very end. Double Dragon 3, The Sacred Stones, was released on the NES in 1991 and was developed as a parallel project to the arcade Double Dragon 3, which it differs from, by Technos Japan. A second sequel to the console beat-em-up genre original Double Dragon. You control Bimmy and Jimmy Lee across the world, beating up dudes, gaining allies, and overall just raising a ruckus. Standard stuff, right? So what would make this game in particular hard even compared to its predecessors? Well, the Sacred Stones decides to emulate real life by having only one life. Yes, one life, no continues, you die, you die. Yes, if you recruit additional teammates, you can switch to them, but the same rules apply. This tweak in gameplay really puts the pressure on the player to not make mistakes, as you don't have a safety cushion anymore to save you. It seems like the enemies know this as well, as they will go for any way to take you out. Cheapness be damned. This is an absolutely brutal affair that will keep players on their toes until they inevitably fall into yet another pit. But throw yourself at this game enough and soon you'll be able to claim the title of Double Dragon Master. Fester's Quest was released on the NES in 1989 by Sunsoft. Based upon the characters of the Addams Family franchise, you control Uncle Fester, the wild card of the family, as he takes his gun to the streets to assault all the alien scum who abducted all the residents of the town in which the Addams Family lives. They didn't get the family though, because of course they didn't. This game is a primarily top-down shooter, with Fester able to use his gun to eliminate all the weird monsters that stand in his way, very slowly. Seriously, Fester takes his sweet time to mosey all down the street. Anyway, defeated enemies drops various goodies such as keys, light bulbs, TNT, and even different weapons that Fester can use to shoot the baddies. You only get 2 life hits at the start, after which you get booted back to the menu. You get a continue option if you don't immediately accidentally hit start, at which case you start at the beginning like before, though you get to keep your current gun and items you've collected. You patrol the town, going in a dark sewer, meeting family members in buildings who will give you stuff, when you basically find a first-person adventure game in your Fester's Quest. Seriously, you navigate around a 3D maze getting items and finding your way out to either a boss or the way out. And these bosses do not mess around, especially with Flatfoot Fester walking about. If Fester could move faster than a snail's pace, it wouldn't be as difficult, but as it stands, Fester's Quest is one of the most frustrating games on the console. The Immortal was released initially in 1990 for the Apple II GS and subsequently ported to the NES in the same year by Electronic Arts. An isometric dungeon crawler, you control a random old wizard as he ventures through the depths of the labyrinth to find his master, the wizard Mortimer, who is called for help. Along the way, the wizard meets many allies and various monster enemies that he must defeat to move forward, both in a third-person view shooting magic from his staff, and in a close-up one-on-one combat mode in which the character starts swinging around a sword. Adventuring around the dungeon is a miserable experience, with traps, pits, and enemies all about. There are even obstacles that can kill the player instantly and not be immediately apparent. Yeah, you have a fireball spell on the overworld, but will a fireball stop a monster Sarlacc from eating you from below? The combat mode is simpler in concept, but it really feels like you're hitting buttons at random to play Rock'em Sock'em robots against random goblins who want a piece of you. Add in puzzle solving, item gathering, and a general sense of where am I going, and you have an adventurous experience to hell in a handbasket. It wouldn't be too bad in gameplay if it wasn't for the overworld traps that quickly drain your health, and then the sudden death traps that ignore everything and just take a life. You have limited lives, by the way, which will kick you back to the title screen when you fuck up too much. There is a password system, but good luck getting far enough to get a password. Dungeon crawling is already not an easy genre to get into, but the Immortal takes that and throws some extra chaos in, just for fun. Now, almost all of these games I described before, while hard, are actual games. Dragon's Lair on the NES is barely a game, and not even a fun one at that. Dragon's Lair was released first in arcades, then ported to the NES in 1990 by Motive Time and CSG ImageSoft. I say ported very loosely, as Dragon's Lair in the arcade was a beautifully drawn cinematic reaction simulator game with art by Don Bluth, and Dragon's Lair on the NES is a washed out platformer that basically requires you to die to learn how to progress. You may think that's similar enough, but there's a big difference. In the arcade, you get an opportunity to continue on in the game if your reaction speed is quick enough, with the directions flashing on screen giving you just enough time to make a quick move. In the NES game, you are basically thrown to the wolves with obstacles that you couldn't have possibly known about ahead of time if you were playing blind. The stiffness of your hero, Dirk the Daring, makes it almost impossible to be able to avoid obstacles that you can't see coming at least 3 seconds ahead of time. What makes this more infuriating is almost everything kills you in one hit, including pits, projectiles, the door in the first area. Only thing Dirk can withstand is getting hit by bats, and that just takes off a small amount of your health bar. Yeah, you have a health bar surprisingly. All of this is combined with a small amount of lives to equal a frustratingly hard game that, on top of annoying you, just isn't very fun. You would be well within your right to just avoid this one completely. It just isn't worth it. Have any other games that causes major heart palpitations? Leave them in the comments below. Thank you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and have a good one. If you bought any Nintendo game in the 80s or 90s or even nowadays, you'll see this bright colored logo somewhere on the package, meaning this game has been evaluated, certified, and approved by Nintendo for use with its systems. Now, we can make an argument about what should be approved or not, but overall, anything with this logo will work with the appropriate Nintendo console, as stated by Nintendo. Now, what about the games that circumvent that process entirely and just release games that don't have Nintendo's approval on it? Yes, they are out there, and today I'm going to talk about 10 particular ones you should try out. Now, if this video ends with the FBI raiding my house, please send some money on my books while I'm in jail. In no particular order, these are 10 of the best unlicensed NES games. Now, before you comment, wait, Tetris, the game made by Nintendo, is not licensed by Nintendo? This isn't that version. In fact, the version made by Nintendo came out after this Tengen version, and in fact, they're the reason why it didn't stay out for the public at all. Tetris by Tengen was released for the NES in 1989 and was made by Tengen. If you are expecting a supermassive improvement on Tetris, you are going to be disappointed. It's just Tetris. But this version is based on Atari's arcade version, which itself was based upon the original game made by Alexei Petronov, a Soviet software engineer. But not known at the time is that the publishing rights to Tetris would be under much legal wrangling in the late 80s, and eventually, Nintendo would emerge victorious to the publishing rights to the NES and Game Boy versions, while Tengen would have to recall their version and destroy it. Due to this version is absurdly rare, with less than 100,000 copies known to exist in the world. Now, what sets this version apart from the Nintendo one that you've probably owned at some point? Well, besides the more Soviet inspiration, with the music, the spelling of the original Tetris logo, and these dancing guys in between rounds, this Tetris, along with competitive multiplayer mode, includes cooperative multiplayer, meaning you and a friend will share one board with both of you dropping pieces at the same time. This mode gets as chaotic as you think it does, but also provides another fun distraction to have fun with Tetris again and again. Now, this might be cheating a little bit, because this game was released in 2010 for the NES by Savat Games, but it actually came out first as a physical cartridge for the NES. So technically, it counts for this list. And it's good it does, because this game is awesome. A Mega Man style platformer, you control Timmy the Battle Kid as he dons a prototype combat suit made by Dr. Tina Byers to fight a criminal organization that plans to build a super mech for world domination. This game is a Metroidvania style game, meaning you can go throughout the fortress that the bad guys dwell in, activate checkpoints, and find warp stations to go to places you've been before. Now, the most defining feature of this game is it's a hard motherfucker. This game takes inspiration from games such as I Wanna Be the Guy series and other rage platformers. And if that immediately makes you itch, it's for good reason. Enemies will quickly attack, shoot, and hone into you if you get close, and it's one-hit death and back to the last continue point for you. If you think that's cruel enough, the bosses you will find will drive you insane, with fairly predictable attack patterns nonetheless causing multiple resets that might cause controller throwing. The graphics are pretty basic, Mega Man-esque, and the music really shines to keep you playing. So if you're craving a challenge, definitely give Battle Kid a try. If you grew up in the 80s and early 90s, Micro Machines might trigger something deep in the childhood part of your brain. Micro Machines were a toy brand about small toy vehicles and sets that were fun to set up and race with friends, sorta similar to Hot Wheels. Even people who didn't own the toys knew about the brand due to the commercials with the fastest talking man alive, running down the product in his distinct dialect.
This is the Micro Machine Man presenting the most midget miniature motorcade of Micro Machines. Each one has dramatic details, terrific trim, precision paint jobs, plus incredible Micro Machine pocket playsets. There's a police station, fire station, restaurant, service station, and more. Perfect pocket portables to take any place. And there are many miniature playsets to play with, and each one comes with its own special edition Micro Machine vehicle and fun, fantastic features that miraculously move. Raise the boat lift at the airport marina, man the gun turret at the army base, clean your car at the car wash, raise the toll bridge. And these playsets fit together to form a Micro Machine world. Micro Machine pocket playsets, so tremendously tiny, so perfectly precise, so dazzlingly detailed, you'll want to pocket them all. Micro Machines and Micro Machine pocket playsets sold separately from Galoob. The smaller they are, the better they are.
Now, putting that premise into video games, and you get a damn fine, but also unlicensed, game. Micro Machines was released on NES in 1991 by Codemasters, who got the go-ahead to develop the game from the company behind the Micro Machines brand, Galoob. But they didn't comply with Daddy Nintendo, so their game was released unlicensed, which is a shame as this game should definitely get much more acclaim. You control a multitude of vehicles in an overhead race against 3 other goobers. The tracks you are racing on changes from race to race, and even the vehicle types change as well. Sometimes you may be in a boat in a soapy bathtub, then you're a dirt truck in a sandbox. The variety kept the races interesting, even if it was essentially the same gameplay, and playing with friends made this even more chaotic and fun. If you happen to find this in the wild, definitely get it. One developer name that you will continue to see over and over again in this video is Tengen, which was a publishing and development arm for Atari. In order to be licensed by Nintendo, you could only release 5 games per year, let Nintendo handle cartridge manufacturing, and the games must be NES exclusive for 2 years. After a failed period fighting this, during which Tengen actually released officially licensed game for the console, Tengen decided to get sneaky and include a chip in their games that would invalidate the lockout chip in the NES that prevented unlicensed games to be played on the system, and sell it their own way. One of these games was the arcade port of the rail shooter Afterburner. Afterburner was released on the NES in 1989 and made by, well, Tengen. You control a fighter jet in multiple levels where your goal is to survive in the skies and shoot down opposing jets. You can shoot your machine guns or shoot limited targeting missiles to hit jets and opposing missiles out of your way and maneuver in really impressive graphics for the system. The arcade is notable due to the fast nature gameplay and the deluxe tilting cabinet that moved the chair along the game. And while the NES couldn't replicate that, it definitely did the fast nature gameplay, which really outclassed much of the rail shooters on the system already. This is a game you have to play to believe it exists, so definitely check it out. One of the original games that Tengen released that was officially Nintendo certified was the original Pac-Man. It was a standard arcade port, and while good, wasn't too notable. Pac-Mania, however, was a port that added a new perspective to the standard gameplay that makes it worth checking out. Pac-Mania was released on the NES in 1990 by Tengen. An isometric take on the Pac-Man formula. You control, well, Pac-Man as he goes through sort of 3D isometric mazes, collecting pellets and avoiding ghosts on the way to clear the board and move on to the next level. Along the way, you can collect fruit, which adds to your point total, and power pellets, which will allow you to eat the ghosts chasing you for a limited time. New to Pac-Mania includes the ability to jump, which allows Pac-Man to jump over ghosts, which adds an entirely new option for maneuvering around. It also includes extra pickups that spawn on the board which cause additional effects, such as super speed or making ghosts vulnerable again. Other than that, it's Pac-Man, and a really enjoyable Pac-Man at that. The graphics, while not as crisp as the arcade, actually hold their own with the tech that they have to work with. The NES really works overtime to make this game work on the system, and their effort pays off. If you've never played Pac-Mania before, the NES version definitely isn't a bad option for you to pick up and play. Oh Lord, we going to church now, people! Spiritual Warfare was released in 1992 by Wisdom Tree, who was a serial outlaw Nintendo chip evader. This game was eventually ported to MS-DOS, Game Boy, and Sega Genesis as well. While most of Wisdom Tree's games were, let's say, not the best, Spiritual Warfare is a competent, actually enjoyable game that you should play if you can. The gameplay is lifted almost directly from Legend of Zelda, with the top-down perspective accompanying the action-adventure gameplay while exploring the world and dispatching enemies in various ways. Instead of swords, you use fruit. Weird, but they each perform differently, with some being faster than others and some having different projection arcs, but each being effective against these heretics. You also have different sub-weapons like Zelda, with the default being bombs or bomb-like performance pieces, I don't know, that explode just the same in Bomberman fashion. More weapons can be gained by gathering doves, which substitutes as rupees in this game, and spending them in stores. The religion angle is strong with this one, with quizzes for power-ups being unavoidable, but honestly, it doesn't intrude deeply to ruin an actually enjoyable Zelda-like adventure across different environments, fighting different centers, fighting boss demons, and collecting Triforce pieces. Oh, I mean, the 6 pieces of the Armor of God. Warning you now, these last entries are almost entirely from Tengen, the Mad Lads. First one up is a port for a Namco classic from the arcades, Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder was released on NES in 1989 by Tengen and was adapted from the Famicom version that was released in the same year. You control Albatross, an agent from a world police organization that is sent in to save a missing female agent from a secret hooded cult. You walk from left to right, shooting various colored goons, not racist, hiding indoors along the level to avoid enemies, and platforming on the various upper levels and boxes that are spread about. Albatross can only take 2 physical hits before dying, and any bullets that strike him will kill him instantly, leading to respawning either at the beginning of the level or at a checkpoint. He uses a pistol with limited bullets, but can reload by entering directly in doors marked ammo, or change to a submachine gun if he finds a door marked arms. There are only 10 levels, with only 5 unique layouts in these levels. But the NES version actually includes a harder second mission. The NES version also includes a password feature, so you don't have to continue at the beginning of the game each time you play, and includes extra hidden bonuses that make the experience worth trying out. While the graphics and sound don't match one-to-one with the arcade version, this home console version actually holds up pretty well and presents the same exciting and agonizing shooting action that is worth the headache. Vindicators was released on the NES in 1988 by Tengen, a direct port from the original Atari arcade game. You control a tank across multiple levels, shooting enemies, avoiding mines, and gathering pickups in a top-down perspective. While making your way through levels, you must manage your fuel and continuously make sure it does not deplete fully, while also avoiding other tanks and turrets. Along the way, you must collect pickups that include stars, which functions as currency, extra fuel, which keeps your tank going, bombs, which bomb, and keys, which allow you to end the level. There are actually 2 exits next to each other that end the level that both require separate keys. One exit will lead you to a bonus section where you can get extra materials, and one leads you to prep for the next level. With the stars you collect, you can upgrade your tank, such as refilling your gas tank, increasing shot range, shot power, and tank shields. This game is a riot to play, with the concept being simple but in execution can be a lot of fun. You can also play this with multiplayer, which will probably lead to fistfights when one of you takes all the pickups, but it's worth the tension in your friendship, and it's pretty much the only way to play this arcade favorite at home. Alien Syndrome was released on the NES in 1988 by Tengen as a port from the arcade. This game is a top-down run and gun where you play as either Ricky or Mary and are tasked with saving their comrades from aliens in different environments. The levels are contained facilities with power-ups and maps on certain parts of the wall, which can be used to the player to change their weapon and see where the remaining survivors are respectively. The aliens will kill the player in one hit, so it's required to continuously keep blasting and make your way around, saving everyone until a required amount has been gotten, at which case the exit opens up. After each level is a boss that is required to be defeated before moving on, and you repeat the process in the next level. This game is actually really fun. It really reminds you of an upgraded Ikari Warriors, with lots of adaptability in how you play. The different guns change up how you hold off aliens, and the increasingly difficulty per level really keeps you on your toes. The NES port pretty much holds on to the appeal of the arcade version, with minimal things lost in transition. Definitely warrants picking up if possible. Play Ball! The RBI Baseball series was massive on the NES, literally outclassing the baseball NES title. But did you know that only the first game was officially licensed by Nintendo? The sequel, RBI Baseball 2, was released unlicensed by Tengen, and the sequel followed suit, probably to Nintendo's utter annoyance. RBI Baseball 3 was released on the NES in 1991 by Tengen, following official releases on the Super NES and Genesis. This game was certified by the MLB Players Association, which allowed the use of MLB player names and stats, which adds a certain level of simulation to the playthroughs. You are also able to pick any team from 1990 or any championship team from 1983 to 1989 and play through an entire season with passwords provided between games. As for the gameplay, well, it's baseball. You probably already know the rules from baseball unless you live under a rock. But improvements to this game besides the season mode include the ability to jump and dive, as well as pick your own lineup, which made this game the most up-to-date and desirable to hardcore baseball fans in the past. For anyone that is looking for a pick-up and play game, this game may be a bit over your head as all the surrounding inclusions might make it feel bloated. But if you look past that, you have a fun baseball game that will keep you entertained while also entrancing your baseball-obsessed friend to the point of obsession. Have any other unlicensed games that should have been on my list? Leave them in the comments. See you later, and
FBI, open up!
back in the day, when buying multiple consoles was out of the question, you had a hard choice to make. Were you a Nintendo kid, a Sega soldier, or maybe a TurboGrafx thing? More often than not, you ended up with a worthwhile console, but sometimes you put your money into one that just didn't live up to the hype and ended up being abandoned by its creators shortly after release. Here are some of those consoles that some grown-up kids are probably still bitter about. In no particular order, here are 10 failed game consoles. let's get this one out of the way early because I covered it already extensively in this video right here, which you should totally watch. But yes, the Gizmondo was a failure from the planning stage all the way to release. And being backed by the Swedish Mafia on top of it just makes the overall story even more hilarious. Trying to challenge Nintendo in the mobile market wasn't an entirely misguided mistake, but mistakes number 2 through 80 include poor third-party game support, poor advertising, no one selling the fucking thing, and overall, making the system super expensive. Releasing a cheaper version with ads was an effort to alleviate that, I guess. If only the ads actually worked. Guess this came out too early, cause mobile games nowadays have this ad system nailed down. A common question I've seen raised over these past 2 or 3 console generations is why doesn't Apple jump in the console market? They've taken over a bunch of different industries. Why not try playing games? All this while ignoring the Mac bonfire and the App Store even more bigger bonfire. Well, they have, and it failed spectacularly. The Pippin was a collaborative effort from Apple and everyone's favorite mobile suit dealer, Bandai, and it was released in 1996 with a price tag of $599. Intended to be an open source CD-ROM console running a Mac OS, Apple hoped that it would be the most adaptable console that would be attractive for third parties to develop for. That was a very costly mistake, as the Pippin sold horribly worldwide and barely had games released for the hardware, leading to a 1-year lifespan with it being officially discontinued in 1997. The memory of this failure probably scared Apple away from the console market for a good while, which in hindsight was probably the best decision. Tiger Electronics is well known for the release of a massive wave of poor mobile console alternatives that were entertaining for about 5 minutes till you threw it to the side and moved on with your life. Well, they attempted to do an actual mobile console, and lo and behold, it was also thrown away quickly. The Gamecom, yes, that is its actual name, was released in 1997 and was marketed for about $69.95. That's amazing, right? You'd think they'd be flying off the shelves. Well, it didn't. While the Gamecom had some interesting features, like a touchscreen and functionality of a PDA, it was also severely lacking in many different areas, including being black and white and extremely hard to see with its tiny screen. The controls were also just as bad, making most games absolutely unplayable. Yeah, it featured Duke Nukem and Mortal Kombat somehow, if you can actually see it. Between this and the previously failed Tiger Electronics console R-Zone, they had a really bad record for actually trying to get into the console market properly. You know what? Maybe I should have put the R-Zone in this spot. Cause what the fuck is this? A Nintendo console? Huh? Well, buckle up. There may be another one on this list as well. But the Virtual Boy was a product released way before its time, honestly. Released in 1995 for about $179.95, this combination console was meant to address the lull in the release schedule for Nintendo before the 64 was ready to go, while also trying to innovate. Something Nintendo has been known to do in lieu of what's expected. 3D in gaming? What could go wrong? Well, your eyesight for one. Having only a 2-color palette to emulate 3D, Nintendo chose red and black, which, in hindsight, wasn't the best decision. Between straining your eyesight trying to see the limited quantity of games, and your neck trying to see in the goggles and stilts that the Virtual Boy was designed as, trying out the Virtual Boy just wasn't worth it in the end, leading to one of Nintendo's biggest regrets. Nintendo would eventually get the concept correct with the release of the 3DS, though most people would be lying if they said they didn't primarily play it with the 3D switch off. Nintendo? What are you doing here again? Well, actually, Nintendo only has a short part in this dumpster fire. This console was primarily headed by Philips, the well-known electronics company. The CDI was released in 1990 initially, with an initial price of $1,000, which was outrageous. The price point was being justified unsuccessfully by claiming it wasn't just an early CD media player, but a complete home entertainment media machine. It wasn't even marketed primarily as a game console until late in its lifespan. Philips also had the advantage of having the opportunity to use Nintendo property characters after a failed deal with Nintendo, of all people, to make a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, but made the absolute worst Mario and Zelda games in response. Fun fact, this same deal for a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo was first signed on by Sony, but Nintendo broke the agreement to work with Philips. Sony would then do their own research and development and later released the PlayStation to, let's say, positive reception. Oh, this hurts. But overall, it cannot be denied that the PlayStation Vita failed to keep Sony's mobile dreams alive. The PlayStation Vita was released in 2011 at the intro price of $249.99, intended to continue Sony's foothold in the mobile console market after the PSP made a name for itself a console generation earlier. While it boasted impressive upgrades and features like console-like graphics, remote play, more memory, and internet capabilities, the Vita hit a hard wall after an initially successful release with hardware sales. And while it had solid third-party support for games and even apps, the consoles eventually weren't selling. Even after changing strategies, the Vita couldn't handle the looming mobile phone gaming market and ended up ending Sony's prospective mobile line of consoles at 2, which is a shame, honestly. The PSP was a welcome addition to the market, and the Vita could have been a competitive alternative, but the player base just wasn't there. Now this is true failure at all stages that I don't feel bad about. Atari used to be the king of the console market, culminating in their dominance during the age of the 2600. Then the video game crash in 1983 happened and whoops, there it goes. Atari tried to reclaim their throne with a broken 5200, the slightly better 7800, and the ambitious Lynx, but none made that big of an impact. With their backs against the wall, Atari needed to hit a home run, and against all odds, they immediately took a grand slam swing with the Atari Jaguar and immediately tore all 3 ligaments in their knee and soiled themselves on the way down. The Jaguar tried to come out the gate with the claim that they were the first 64-bit console on the market, ahead of the PS1, Saturn, and N64. To which it's true if you count 32-bit processors taped together as 64-bit. Consumers weren't fooled, however, and with the absolutely absurd controller, seriously, what do you do with all these buttons? And not a first-rate game library, the Jaguar bombed. That's not all, however. Atari, seeing another console go down in flames, decided the best course of action was to release a CD add-on. It didn't work. So you know I said mobile phone gaming is pretty much taking over the mobile market with apps on phones replacing stuff like the Game Boy? Well, the N-Gage had that in mind just 15 years earlier, and not well. The N-Gage was released in 2003 by mobile phone manufacturer Nokia with an initial price of $299. Its big gimmick was it was a smartphone and gaming console in 2003. What wizardry is this? It even had a good lineup of games to be released for it. So how did this console end up on this list? First off, the design of the actual phone was an engineering nightmare. The rounded taco design of the phone made it difficult to actually talk on it without looking stupid. Second, the phone buttons crammed on the phone made controlling the games exceedingly difficult, and worst of all, some world-class intellect made it so you can only change games when you take out the phone battery. Yeah, so be surprised when you hear that the console and games sold exceedingly poorly, and even after some redesigns, it was discontinued in 2006. Alright, now hang on. Let me explain. Like I said before, Nintendo has always walked to the beat of their own drums in regards to hardware production. While they were the headliner during the NES and Super Nintendo era, the N64 and GameCube saw the introduction of heated rivals, Sony and Microsoft, and their initial consoles that pushed sales of Nintendo consoles down. Even then, Nintendo didn't try and copy the modern blueprint in lieu of just producing what they thought was innovative. This strategy produced gangbusters with the Wii and let off a couple awkward coughs with the Wii U. The Wii U was released in 2012 for an initial price of $299 for the base model and $349 for the deluxe. As the follow-up from the Wii, Nintendo thought they could make lightning strike twice with a gimmick, and the tablet controller with its own functions wasn't that bad of an idea. Problem though, the rollout was confusing. The way Nintendo premiered the console, the audience couldn't tell if it was a new one or just a new tablet peripheral. On top of that, the Wii worked because it was simple. Use the motion control stick to bowl, play tennis, hack up people with a glowing laser sword, and you and your grandma pretty much get it instantly. The Wii U didn't have that simplicity. Most games had you ham-fistedly use the tablet for gameplay. That was a detriment to the core game, especially in Star Fox Zero's case. The tablet itself couldn't even be separated a room's length from the console, making it feel just like one confusing mess. The Wii U is by far Nintendo's biggest mainline console failure, and if it wasn't for the Switch coming in and righting the ship, it might have caused irreversible damage to Nintendo's reputation. Now, what the hell is an Ouya? Well, in contrast to the failing big boy consoles that I talked about before, the Ouya was an indie console that was almost fully funded by fans. That's right, this wasn't company backed. This console had its start on the website Kickstarter, where projects and ideas can be pitched to be funded by donations from prospective fans. The Ouya was meant to be an Android-based console that played all the mobile games for phone and tablet, both a controller and ability to play on TV. For some reason, this excited backers in 2012 apparently, because not only was the Ouya fully funded, but it became one of Kickstarter's highest earning projects ever. So with it being fully funded, production flew through and the Ouya was officially released in 2013 for $99. What a deal, right? Well, it sold poorly. People outside of the initial bubble had no interest in buying a dedicated Android gaming console when they had phones and tablets at the ready already. Despite trying to keep the thing alive, the Ouya crashed and burned for good in 2015, in which case the assets were sold off to the Razer company, and the creators rode their bicycles into the sunset. Have any other consoles that fumbled on the 1 yard line? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. So yeah, video games are fun, right? Right. What's your favorite video game? I prefer the Tiger Electronics version of Mortal Kombat, or the plug-and-play bootleg my grandma got me for Christmas 2 years in a row. Okay, but my actual favorite consoles are a lot better than that trash. Side note, I stress consoles, so no overpowered doorstopper will make an appearance on my list. This is my top 10 favorite consoles. Number 10. At number 10, we have the PSP. I'm a lifelong Nintendo handheld loyalist, but even I have to admit, when my uncle picked up a PSP, I was seething with jealousy. PlayStation stuff on the go without having to get off the game because your dad wants a turn? When I finally got one of my own, it was love at first sight. All of the game series I played on console getting releases on mobile, either through ports or spin-offs, jackpot. Plus, it had all the RPGs. Some of them weren't very good, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't spend hours on SOCOM Fireteam Bravo 2 or Tekken 5. Plus it had its own internet browser, so teenagers certainly got their use out of it as well. Hint hint, nudge nudge. Number 9. The NES. Oh, grandpop themselves. The NES was before my time, but being able to catch up later in life between finding an old NES at a thrift store, emulation machines, and even re-releases has schooled me to ample amount of history. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Final Fantasy, Mega Man all got their start here, with many others I'm not even mentioning. You can find random games now that don't get a lot of attention that are still fun to play. Plus, this is as simple as it gets. You got 2 action buttons, a control pad, and a start and select button. That's it. Even your technologically illiterate uncle could keep up with you in a game of black box golf. Number 8. At number 8, the Switch. The most modern console on my list, and for good reason. Someone give Nintendo R&D their props already. While Sony and Microsoft race to make an outdated PC, Nintendo always tries to think outside of the box with their consoles, and innovate, which always leads to success for them in their own little niche. Not you. The Switch is exactly that. Combining their stellar handheld market with their sluggish console market to one console has done gangbusters for Nintendo. Being able to play a game on the go and plug it up to a home console just as easy is such a great feature. Having stellar games also helps, which has never been Nintendo's problem. Mario and Zelda are back again with A+ outings. Smash Bros. Ultimate exploded everyone's minds and their wallets. Even Samus was let out of the doghouse for one of the best games we didn't expect. Now maybe we'll hear about Metroid Prime 4 sometime soon. Eventually. Number 7. At number 7, the GameCube. The dark horse, one of the rare times Nintendo was buried in the dirt by the other consoles alongside Sega. It's okay, I still love you though. The GameCube might get looked at harshly by some, but the GameCube is great, even more so nowadays. It continued the 4-player aspect from the N64, which led to many different party games being made for it, such as WarioWare, Custom Robo Double Dash, and of course, Big Daddy Smash Melee. The single player aspect wasn't left missing, with gems like Eternal Darkness, Metroid Prime, and the absolute gem, Star Fox Adventures. What wasn't good? The baby disc. The hell was up with those? Number 6. At number 6, PlayStation 4. So fun fact, I didn't own a PS4 until 2017, a few years into its lifespan. Yeah, you know, college and good old rent getting in the way of gaming, whatever. So when I got my first big boy job, one of the first purchases I made was buying a fresh used PS4 off of Facebook Marketplace from some guy in a parking lot. You know, not sketch. But when I finally got one, I was able to catch up on a bunch of games that I missed from both this era and the last. Between all the compilations of older games, and games like The Last of Us, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon Zero Dawn, Persona 5, and most importantly, Fall Guys, I fell back into heavy modern gaming again. Of course, the allure of retro didn't stay away for long, but I still keep an eye out for new releases because of this console. Number 5. At number 5, the Game Boy. So you know how I said the Switch combined Nintendo's console and mobile markets? Well, look at what started their string of successful mobile releases, the Nintendo Game Boy. The most sold console of all time, the Nintendo Game Boy was like an NES on wheels. It had all your favorite series in black and white, and even started some series, such as, I don't know, Pokemon. You could even play your Game Boy games on console due to the Super Game Boy attachment for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo would only do better as they released the Game Boy Light, the Game Boy Color, and then another one that might be higher up on this list. No spoilers. Number 4. At number 4, the Nintendo 64. The multiplayer king before the internet. The Nintendo 64 was a lot of 90s babies' first console, and most of our memories playing games with our friends started with this. 4-player co-op without accessories meant a lot of games could include a multiplayer mode, and boy did they take advantage of it. Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye 64, Bomberman 64. Aren't you tired of me saying 64? Super Smash Bros, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Mario Party. All good friendship enders, just in case those sons of bitches get too big ahead. The Zelda series of course turned in 2 heavy hitters in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and Mario of course came out with a little game called Super Mario 64. No Samus representation though. Wonder where she was at this time. Number 3. The PlayStation 2. Now this is a perfect example of a great all-around console. I played the PS1 pretty often. It was pretty good. I wasn't particularly attached to many games, but it was still a good time. The PlayStation 2, however, is an absolute monster. And this monster was created due to how easy it was for developers to make games for it. Almost every company dropped a diamond on this console. Shadow of the Colossus, the GTA 3 trilogy, God of War 1 and 2, Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, Devil May Cry, Burnout, Final Fantasy 10, 11, and 12, Persona 3 and 4, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Okami, man! And that's not even half the amount of gems. Nowadays, most of these have been released in compilation packs or upgraded ports, but back in the day, the PlayStation 2 reigns supreme in terms of quality. Number 2. The Game Boy Advance. Now if you thought the Game Boy broke wallets, when Nintendo released its sequel, the Game Boy Advance, all of the 90s babies collectively flew into fits begging our parents to get us one. Just like how the NES to Super Nintendo pipeline was unbelievable, the Game Boy to Game Boy Advance was similar, bringing 16-bit capabilities to the handheld and allowing some of the best games of the previous era to be ported, as well as new games that keep the same style to be made. While the Nintendo 64 and the rest of the 64-bit era tried to mainly show off 3D, the GBA kept the spirit of 2D simpleness going, while also coming up with its own original stuff. Golden Sun, Metroid Fusion, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, The Minish Cap, Four Swords, Crystal Chronicles. Speaking of the last two, wasn't the connectivity with the GameCube super cool? And things only got better with the release of Game Boy Advance SP, where you finally had a backlight in the console, which meant not having to buy that shitty squiggly light attachment that never really worked. And number 1, the Super Nintendo. If you're familiar with me at all, you know this isn't a surprise. The Super Nintendo basically helped shape me as a gamer that I am today. Hell, I still own my original Super Nintendo and all the games that I had when I was 3 and play them pretty frequently. The 16-bit graphics and Super FX chips made games look amazing for the time, that even still hold up better than the awkward 3D stage does, with some exceptions. Also helps that most of the consoles were packaged with Super Mario World, one of the best games ever made. Add on the Donkey Kong Country series, Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Mega Man X, Final Fantasy VI, Super Mario RPG, and, you know, my favorite game ever, Rise of the Robots, and you have a fucking force. Even made my color scheme for my channels, molded right after the North American Super Nintendo color palette, which is pretty cool. I can name all of my favorite games for the rest of time for this video, and I still would leave some off accidentally, which is why the Super Nintendo is my favorite console of all time. I have a console I didn't list or listed too low. Leave your opinion in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong. I'll be waiting. Have a good one. Don't forget to like and subscribe the video.